The fluorescent lights in Riverside General Hospital cast shadows across the empty break room at 2:47 a.m. Sarah Lawson sat motionless on a metal bench, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing controlled and steady. In 12 minutes, federal marshals would breach the main entrance. In 15 minutes, the CEO who'd spent 6 months humiliating her would be in handcuffs. But right now, in this frozen moment, she looked like just another exhausted night shift nurse, unremarkable, powerless, invisible. The faded tattoo on her inner wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve, told a different story. A military medic's cross with 8 hash marks, 8 deployments, 8 wars worth of patience. And tonight, all of it had led to this. Sarah wasn't waiting to be saved. She was counting down to the moment she'd finally stop hiding who she really was. Don't look away now. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this journey reaches. Let's go. The security badge clipped to Sarah Lawson's scrubs read, Temporary Staff, Probationary. She'd been wearing it for 6 months, which meant half a year of being invisible, half a year of biting her tongue, while people who didn't know her name told her how to do everything. The laminated photo showed her tired eyes and flat expression, exactly what she wanted them to see. Nothing. Nobody. Just another body filling a shift. Riverside General sprawled across 3 buildings in the heart of Bellwood, a Colorado town small enough that everyone knew the hospital's reputation had gone from solid to suspicious in less than 2 years. Patients complained online. Former employees posted cryptic warnings. The local news ran a piece about concerning trends before quietly dropping it. Sarah had read every single complaint. That's why she was here. The night shift orientation happened in a windowless room with flickering overhead lights and stale coffee nobody touched. 8 new hires sat in cheap plastic chairs while the nurse supervisor, a sharp-faced woman named Diane Fletcher, speed-talked through protocols without making eye contact. You clock in on time or you're written up. You follow the medication schedule to the minute. You do not question attending physicians. You do not leave your station without permission. You do not discuss hospital business with anyone outside this building. Diane's eyes swept the room like a prison guard checking for defiance. Anyone have questions? Silence. Sarah kept her face neutral, her posture relaxed. Years of taking orders from people who outranked her had taught her how to look compliant while cataloging everything wrong in a situation. Good. Diane stood. Night shift is 3 nurses per floor. You'll rotate through stations. Don't make friends. Don't make mistakes. Understood? The other new hires nodded nervously. Sarah just watched. After orientation, Diane pulled her aside. Your former military? Yes. Combat? Field medic, Army. Diane's mouth tightened. We don't run things like the military here. You follow my orders, not some protocol you learned overseas. Clear? Sarah met her gaze without blinking. Crystal. Good. You're on the 4th floor, geriatric wing. Low drama, low stakes. Keep your head down and you'll be fine. Sarah took the assignment without reacting, even though she knew exactly what it meant. They were putting her somewhere they thought she couldn't cause trouble. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere easy to ignore. Perfect. The 4th floor smelled like disinfectant covering something worse. Pale green walls, scuffed linoleum, outdated equipment that looked like it had been salvaged from a hospital that closed in the 90s. Sarah walked the length of the corridor during her first shift, counting beds, noting staff, memorizing faces. 32 patients, 2 overworked nurses who looked like they hadn't slept in days. 1 charge nurse who sat at the station scrolling her phone. Room 412 had a call button that had been taped over. Sarah stopped outside the door. Inside, an elderly man lay in bed, his breathing shallow, his water pitcher empty. The monitor next to him showed vitals that should have triggered an alert an hour ago. She stepped inside. Sir? Can you hear me? His eyes opened slowly. Confusion, then relief. Water, he rasped. Sarah filled the pitcher from the bathroom sink, checked the temperature, and poured him a cup. She held it while he drank, her other hand steadying his shoulder. How long since someone checked on you? Hours, maybe, I don't know. They don't come. Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed gentle. I'm checking on you now, Shas. She adjusted his pillow, checked his IV line, and made notes on his chart. His name was Walter Briggs, 78, post-surgical recovery. No family listed, nobody advocating for him. "You'll be okay, Walter, I promise." His hand caught hers weakly. "You're new." "I am." "Be careful here." Sarah's pulse didn't change, but her attention sharpened. "Why do you say that?" Walter's eyes darted toward the door. "People who ask questions don't stay long." She stayed with him another 10 minutes, enough to stabilize his vitals and make sure he wasn't in immediate distress. When she returned to the nurse's station, the charge nurse, Kimberly, according to her badge, looked up with irritation. "You were in 412 for 15 minutes. He was dehydrated, and his monitor wasn't reporting correctly. Did you document it?" "I'm documenting it now." Kimberly stood, arms crossed. "Your job is to follow the schedule, not play hero, not make the rest of us look bad." Sarah's fingers paused over the keyboard. "I wasn't trying to." "I don't care what you were trying to do. Stay on schedule or you won't last the week." Two other nurses at nearby desks kept their eyes down, pretending they weren't listening. Sarah recognized the body language immediately. People who'd learned that staying silent was safer than backing someone up. She finished documenting Walter's care without another word. The rest of the shift crawled by. Every time Sarah responded to a patient need, she felt eyes on her back. Every time she took an extra moment, someone made a comment. By 6 a.m., when her shift finally ended, she felt the same exhaustion she used to feel after 18-hour stretches in field hospitals overseas. Except back then, she'd been exhausted from saving lives, not from fighting to do her job. In the employee locker room, another night shift nurse approached while Sarah changed out of her scrubs. The woman was older, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back tight and the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much. "You're the new military nurse." "That's me." "Then you know how to take orders and keep your mouth shut." Sarah closed her locker. "I know how to do my job. Your job here is survival, not heroics." The woman's voice dropped. "They don't want nurses who care. They want nurses who comply. Learn the difference fast or you'll be gone like the others." "How many others?" The woman's expression hardened. "Enough that you shouldn't ask." She walked away before Sarah could respond. Sarah drove home in silence, watching the sunrise bleed orange across the mountains. Her apartment was a furnished studio 3 miles from the hospital. Generic, temporary, exactly what someone in her position would rent. She made coffee, opened her laptop, and logged into the encrypted server she'd been maintaining for months. The database was extensive. Financial records, employee complaints, supply chain discrepancies, patient outcome reports, everything she'd quietly gathered since deciding to come here. Riverside General wasn't just failing, it was being bled dry from the inside. Sarah had inherited the hospital 8 months ago when her father died. Richard Lawson, a decorated trauma surgeon who'd built Riverside General from the ground up 30 years ago, had spent his final months warning her something was wrong. His last words to her, whispered in a hospice room, had been desperate. "Don't let them destroy it." She'd arrived expecting mismanagement. She'd found something far worse. Medications disappeared from inventory faster than patients could use them. Equipment purchases were billed at double their value. Staffing records showed nurses and doctors who didn't exist. And at the center of it all was Marcus Hale, the hospital's CEO, a man who joined Riverside 2 years ago and turned a respected community hospital into something unrecognizable. But Sarah needed proof he'd do anything to protect his empire. So she'd gone undercover. 6 months as a probationary nurse. 6 months of humiliation, disrespect, and deliberate invisibility. 6 months of watching Marcus Hale terrorize staff, manipulate board members, and pocket millions while patients suffered. She was done watching. Sarah pulled up a file marked Board Meeting, June 14th, tomorrow morning. She'd planted the bait weeks ago, a folder full of damning financial documents, left in a place where Marcus would find it if he was looking, and he was always looking for threats. Her phone buzzed, a text from a blocked number. He took it, 2:43 a.m. Security footage confirms. Sarah allowed herself a small, cold smile. Marcus Hale had just signed his own arrest warrant. Washing. The next shift started the same way they all did. Hostility disguised as professionalism. Diane intercepted Sarah at the entrance to the 4th floor. "Conference room, now!" Sarah followed her into a cramped space that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Diane shut the door and turned on her with barely controlled rage. Do you think you're special? No. Then why are you ignoring direct instructions? I'm not. Room 412, room 407, room 419. You spent 20 minutes with each patient last night when you were scheduled for 5-minute checks. You're throwing off the entire floor's rhythm. Sarah kept her voice level. Those patients needed care. Those patients need you to do what you're told. Diane stepped closer. I don't know what kind of cowboy unit you ran with in the military, but here, you follow my schedule, my rules, my hospital. Not your hospital, Sarah thought. Mine. But she just nodded. Understood. I'm writing you up. One more deviation and you're terminated. Are we clear? Yes. Diane held the stare for another 5 seconds, then dismissed her with a wave. Sarah returned to the floor and worked her shift exactly as instructed. 5-minute checks. No conversation, no deviation. Every time she heard a call button go unanswered, every time she saw a patient struggling alone, she felt her training scream at her to intervene. But tonight wasn't about being a hero. Tonight was about staying in position until the hammer fell. At 11 p.m., she took her break in the empty hallway near the administrative wing. She sat on a metal bench, a folder beside her, her eyes half closed like she was resting. She wasn't resting. She was counting. Footsteps approached from the east corridor. Expensive shoes on linoleum, the confident stride of someone who believed he owned everything he walked past. Marcus Hale. Sarah didn't move. She kept her breathing even, her posture relaxed. Through barely opened eyes, she watched him pause when he spotted her. For a moment, he seemed to consider walking past. Then his gaze landed on the folder beside her. He moved closer. Sarah's pulse stayed steady, combat steady, the kind of calm that came from years of working under fire. She'd learned long ago that the most dangerous moment wasn't when bullets flew, it was the silence right before. The breath between heartbeats, the second before everything changed. Marcus reached down and picked up the folder. She felt him hesitate, glancing at her face to confirm she was asleep. Then she heard the soft click of his phone camera. Once, twice, 3 times. He set the folder back down carefully and walked away. Sarah waited 30 seconds after his footsteps faded before opening her eyes fully. The security camera mounted in the corner had captured everything. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message. He took the bait. The response came instantly. Warrant secured. Federal team mobilizes 6 a.m. Sarah closed her eyes for real this time, just for a moment, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Relief. Tomorrow, the war ended. Tonight, she finished her shift. Brickets. The last hours crawled by in surreal silence. Sarah moved through her rounds like a ghost, checking vitals, adjusting medication, speaking softly to patients who'd grown used to being invisible. In room 412, Walter was awake despite the late hour. "You're still here," he said, surprised. "Still here." "I thought they'd have fired you by now." Sarah smiled faintly. "Not yet." "Good." He struggled to sit up, and she helped him adjust. "You remind me of the nurses I had overseas, Korea. They didn't take any nonsense from the officers." "Sounds like smart women." "They were. Tough as nails, but gentle when it mattered." His eyes searched her face. "You've seen combat." It wasn't a question. "I have." "Then you know what I mean when I say this place feels wrong. Not broken. Wrong." Sarah's chest tightened. "I know exactly what you mean. They think we're too old or too sick to notice. But we notice." Walter's hand gripped hers with surprising strength. "Someone needs to do something." "Someone is." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he understood something he couldn't name. When Sarah left his room, she found Diane waiting at the nurse's station with crossed arms and a termination notice in her hand. "You're done." Sarah blinked. "Excuse me?" "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "On what grounds?" "Insubordination, poor performance, violation of hospital protocol." Diane's smile was cold. "Pick whichever one makes you feel better." 2 security guards appeared at the end of the hallway. Sarah felt the anger rise in her chest. Not hot, but cold and controlled. She'd spent 6 months swallowing rage, 6 months letting people like Diane treat her like she was nothing. Just a few more hours. "I'd like to appeal this decision to the board." Diane laughed. "The The board doesn't take appeals from probationary staff. You're nobody here. Accept it. The security guards approached. Sarah recognized one of them, a younger guy named Trevor, who'd always been polite when their paths crossed. "Ma'am," Trevor said quietly, almost apologetically, "we need to escort you out." Sarah held Diane's gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she nodded, removed her badge, and set it on the desk. Understood. She walked between the security guards toward the elevator, her head high, her steps measured. Behind her, she heard Diane already on the phone, probably reporting to Marcus that the problem was handled. They rode the elevator in silence. When they reached the ground floor, Trevor spoke softly. "For what it's worth, you were the best nurse on that floor." "Thanks, Trevor. I'm sorry it ended this way." Sarah almost told him it hadn't ended, that in less than 6 hours, everything was going to change, that the people who'd treated her like garbage were about to learn what real accountability looked like. Instead, she just said, "Me too." They walked her to the employee exit. The night air was cold and sharp, stars bright overhead. Sarah stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the hospital, this building her father had built, this place that had been corrupted into something unrecognizable. She checked her phone. 4:47 a.m. In 73 minutes, federal marshals would arrive. In 73 minutes, Marcus Hale's world would collapse. Sarah walked to her car, started the engine, and drove exactly 3 blocks before pulling into a 24-hour diner parking lot. She ordered coffee she didn't drink and sat in a booth with a clear view of the hospital entrance. And waited. At 5:30 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message. "Team is 15 minutes out. Board members notified to arrive at 6:30 for emergency meeting." Sarah typed back, "I'll be there." The response came immediately. "We'll be ready." She paid for the coffee and drove back to Riverside General, just as the sun started to break over the mountains. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few early shift workers and the overnight security vehicles. Sarah parked in a visitor spot and walked toward the main entrance. She wasn't wearing scrubs anymore. She'd changed into dark slacks, a white blouse, and a blazer. Professional. Authoritative. Nothing like the exhausted, invisible nurse they'd humiliated for 6 months. She sat on the bench outside the main entrance, her leather folder in her lap, and watched the parking lot. At 6:15, 3 black SUVs pulled in, moving with the kind of precision that made people nervous. Federal marshals. At 6:20, a sedan arrived with 2 investigators from the state medical board. At 6:25, board members started trickling in, confusion evident on their faces. And at 6:28, Marcus Hale's silver Tesla pulled into his reserved spot. He stepped out looking polished and confident, tailored suit, perfect hair, the expression of a man who'd never faced real consequences in his life. He was on his phone, laughing at something, completely unaware of what waited inside. He walked past Sarah without even glancing at her. Just another random woman on a bench, nobody worth noticing. Sarah stood slowly, tucked her folder under her arm, and followed him inside. The lobby had been transformed. Federal agents stood near every exit. Board members clustered nervously near the elevator. Diane Fletcher stood frozen by the reception desk, her face pale as she realized something catastrophic was happening. Marcus stopped in the middle of the lobby, his smile faltering as he registered the scene. "What the hell is this?" One of the federal marshals stepped forward, badge out. "Marcus Hale?" "Yes, but..." "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit Medicare fraud." The lobby went silent. Marcus's face shifted from confusion to rage. "This is insane. I don't know what kind of mistake." "No mistake, sir. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling..." "You'll have access to counsel at the federal building. Right now you need to comply." Marcus's eyes swept the lobby desperately, looking for someone to fix this, someone to intervene. His gaze landed on Diane, who looked like she might pass out. Then on the board members, who were backing away from him like he was contagious. Then his eyes found Sarah, standing near the elevator, calm, still, watching. Recognition flickered across his face, the probationary nurse he'd ordered fired hours ago. But there was something else in his expression now, something like the slow, terrible realization that he'd made a mistake. Sarah walked forward until she stood directly in front of him. "My name is Sarah Lawson," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent lobby. Former Army field medic, registered nurse. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. And legal owner of Riverside General Hospital. The silence shattered into chaos. Board members started talking over each other. Diane stumbled backward like she'd been struck. Marcus's face went from red to white to red again. That's impossible. It's documented, one of the federal investigators said, stepping forward with a tablet. Sarah Lawson inherited full ownership 8 months ago following Richard Lawson's death. She's been operating undercover to investigate complaints and financial irregularities. Sarah met Marcus's eyes without flinching. You made it easy. All I had to do was give you something to steal, then watch you take it. You set me up. I gave you an opportunity to do the right thing. You chose to photograph confidential documents instead. She glanced at the federal marshal. There's video footage from last night, 2:43 a.m., 4th floor administrative wing. The marshal nodded. We have it. Marcus lunged toward her, rage overriding self-preservation, but 2 agents caught him before he moved 3 feet. You lying... Careful, Sarah said softly. There are cameras here too. The marshals cuffed him and started walking him toward the exit. Marcus fought against them, still trying to talk his way out, still believing he could spin this into something survivable. Sarah watched him disappear through the doors, then turned to face the board members who were staring at her like she'd materialized out of thin air. Emergency meeting, she said calmly. Conference room, 5 minutes. They scattered like startled birds. Diane remained frozen near the reception desk, her face a mask of disbelief. Sarah walked past her without stopping, but Diane's voice cracked out. How long? Sarah paused. 6 months? You let me treat you like... Like what? Like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. Sarah turned back. I needed to see who would abuse power when they thought nobody was watching. Congratulations. You made the list. She walked toward the elevator, leaving Diane standing there with nothing left to say. In the conference room, federal investigators laid out the evidence. Millions embezzled through fake vendors. Medications diverted to black market sales. Staff terrorized into silence. Patients neglected while Marcus enriched himself in his inner circle. The board members looked shell-shocked. What happens now? One of them asked. Sarah stood at the head of the table, the same table where her father had once sat planning how to serve this community before everything went wrong. Now we fix it, she said. Every wrongfully terminated employee gets contacted today. Every suspended investigation gets reopened. Every complaint gets reviewed, and we find out who else was involved. She looked around the table at the faces staring back at her. Riverside General was built to save lives. We're going back to doing that. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of that can leave now. Nobody moved. Outside the conference room windows, morning light flooded across the hospital grounds. Staff were arriving for day shift, unaware that everything had changed while they slept. Somewhere in the building, Walter was probably awake, wondering why federal vehicles were parked outside. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Trevor, the security guard. Is it true? Are you really the owner? She typed back, yes. Holy shit. Yeah. Does this mean you're coming back? Sarah looked out of the hospital, her hospital now, officially and openly. The building her father had built. The place she'd sworn to protect. I never really left, she typed. 3 floors above her, in room 412, Walter would later tell the story of the quiet nurse who'd promised she'd make things right. He'd tell it to other patients, to visiting family members, to anyone who'd listen. And in the telling, it would grow, not into something bigger than what happened, but into something that mattered more. The story of someone who'd been underestimated, discarded, and dismissed. Someone who'd waited for exactly the right moment to prove everyone wrong. The conference room cleared by 9 a.m., board members scattering with assignments and barely concealed panic. Sarah stood alone at the window watching staff arrive for day shift, their faces showing confusion at the federal vehicles still parked outside. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing, texts from employees she'd worked alongside for 6 months. People who'd ignored her or dismissed her, now suddenly very interested in talking. She ignored most of them. The door opened behind her. Margaret Chen, the hospital's chief financial officer, stepped inside. She was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair and the kind of rigid posture that came from decades of dealing with difficult men in boardrooms. I need to speak with you. Sarah turned. Go ahead. Margaret closed the door and stood with her arms crossed. I didn't know. About Marcus? About any of it. The fake vendors, the diverted medications, the... She stopped, jaw tight. I reviewed every financial report he gave me. Everything looked legitimate. Because he made sure it did. I should have caught it. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Margaret's hands were shaking slightly despite her controlled expression. Real distress, not performance. How long have you been CFO here? 4 years? And before Marcus arrived? The finances were clean, tight, but clean. Your father ran this hospital like a military operation. Every dollar accounted for, every decision documented. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. When Marcus came in, he said he was modernizing our systems, making us more efficient. I believed him. Did you profit from any of his schemes? No? Can you prove that? Margaret pulled a flash drive from her pocket and set it on the conference table. Every personal financial record I have, bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts, I'll submit to a full audit, whatever you need. Sarah picked up the flash drive. The federal investigators will want to talk to you. I know, I've already contacted my attorney. Margaret met her eyes directly. I failed your father's legacy. I failed this hospital. I won't fight whatever consequences come from that. There was something in her voice that reminded Sarah of the older sergeants she'd served with overseas, people who'd made mistakes and owned them without excuses. She pocketed the flash drive. Then help me fix it. Margaret blinked. What? You know the financial systems better than anyone. Help me untangle what Marcus did. Help me find everyone he was working with. Sarah moved closer. Or you can wait for the investigators to piece it together while the hospital bleeds out. Your choice. The older woman's composure cracked for just a second, relief flashing across her face before she locked it down again. When do we start? Now. They spent the next 3 hours in Margaret's office, pulling apart 2 years of financial records. The scope of the theft was staggering. Marcus hadn't just skimmed profits, he'd built an entire shadow operation, fake consulting firms, shell companies, equipment purchases that never materialized, every move designed to look legitimate on paper while funneling money into accounts he controlled. Here, Margaret highlighted a series of transactions. Medical equipment supplier. We supposedly paid them $800,000 over the last year. Supposedly? The company exists, but the equipment never arrived. I found the original invoices buried in archived files. They showed different amounts, different delivery dates. Someone altered the records after the fact. Sarah leaned over her shoulder, scanning the documents. Who had access to alter them? Only 3 people. Me, Marcus, and his assistant, Elena. Elena Voss? Yes. She's been with him since he arrived. Handles all his scheduling, correspondence, confidential files. Margaret pulled up another screen. She also has power of attorney over one of the shell companies receiving payments. Sarah's stomach tightened. Elena was young, maybe 28, always perfectly dressed and quietly efficient. Sarah had watched her for months without seeing anything suspicious, which meant she was either innocent or very good at hiding. Where is she now? Margaret checked her phone. She called in sick this morning, first time in 2 years. That's not suspicious at all. Should I contact her? No. Sarah pulled out her phone and texted the federal investigator's number she'd been given. Let the marshals handle it. If she's involved, we don't want her destroying evidence. Margaret nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. Last week I found a discrepancy in our medication inventory, opioids specifically. The digital record showed they'd been dispensed to patients, but when I cross-referenced with nursing logs, the amounts didn't match. How much are we talking about? Tens of thousands of pills over 6 months. Street value close to $500,000. Sarah felt cold anger settle in her chest. Stealing money was bad enough. Stealing medications that patients needed, medications that would end up on the black market destroying lives, that was something else entirely. Who else knows about this? Just you now. I was planning to bring it to Marcus this week. Margaret's expression darkened. Which probably would have gotten me fired. Or worse. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Miss Lawson, this is Detective Ray Brennan with Bellwood PD. We need you to come down to the station. Sarah's pulse quickened. Is this about the hospital investigation? Partially. We've just taken someone into custody who's claiming you coerced them into making false statements about Marcus Hale. Who? Diane Fletcher, your former supervisor. Sarah closed her eyes. Of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up and found Margaret watching her with concern. Problem? Someone's trying to flip the narrative. I need to go. Want me to come with you? No. Keep pulling those financial records. If Elena surfaces, let me know immediately. Sarah grabbed her jacket. And Margaret? Don't trust anyone who is close to Marcus. Not until we know how deep this goes. The drive to the police station took 15 minutes through downtown Bellwood. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Diane making accusations was predictable. She'd just lost her job and her protection, but the timing suggested coordination. Someone had gotten to her fast, probably offered her a deal to muddy the waters. The question was who? Detective Brennan met her in the lobby, a stocky man in his 50s with tired eyes and coffee stains on his shirt. He looked like he'd been dealing with complicated people for too long. Ms. Lawson, thanks for coming in. What exactly is Diane claiming? Let's talk in my office. He led her down a narrow hallway to a cramped room that smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. A digital recorder sat on the desk between them. Do I need a lawyer? Sarah asked. That's up to you. Right now, I'm just trying to understand what happened at your hospital. Brennan leaned back in his chair. Diane Fletcher says you threatened her. Says you told her she'd lose her job unless she provided testimony against Marcus Hale. That's not true. She also says you posed as a nurse without proper credentials, that you falsified employment records to gain access to confidential patient information. Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm a registered nurse with active credentials. I was hired through normal channels and completed all required training. Nothing about my employment was falsified. But you didn't tell anyone you owned the hospital. There's no legal requirement to disclose ownership when working as staff. I passed background checks, licensing verification, everything. Sarah met his eyes directly. And I didn't threaten Diane. I documented her violations of patient care protocols and reported them through proper channels. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Marcus Hale's lawyer is making noise about entrapment. Says you created a scenario specifically designed to make him commit a crime he otherwise wouldn't have committed. I left documents in a semi-public location. Marcus chose to photograph them without permission. That was his decision, not mine. But you knew he would. I suspected he would based on his pattern of behavior. That's not entrapment, that's basic investigative work. The detective pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. Inside were photos, surveillance footage from the hospital, time-stamped and labeled. Sarah recognized the hallway where she'd sat last night, the bench, the folder beside her. These images were taken from hospital security servers, Brennan said. Marcus's lawyer claims they were illegally obtained without warrant or probable cause. Sarah flipped through the photos. The hospital security system is mine. I have full legal access to all footage. No warrant required. Convenient. Legal. Brennan sighed and rubbed his face. Look, I'm not trying to jam you up here, but this is going to get messy. Marcus has connections, money, and a legal team that's already filing motions. They're going to attack every piece of evidence, every procedure, every decision you made. Let them. That confident? Sarah leaned forward. Detective, I spent 6 months documenting systematic fraud, patient neglect, and criminal conspiracy. I have financial records, witness testimony, video evidence, and a paper trail that proves Marcus Hale and his associates stole millions of dollars while endangering patients. I followed every legal requirement. I didn't entrap anyone. I just stopped hiding and let them reveal who they really were. Brennan watched her carefully. You know he's claiming you're mentally unstable. Says you blame him for your father's death and fabricated this entire investigation as revenge. Something cold moved through Sarah's chest. My father died of pancreatic cancer. Marcus wasn't even working at the hospital when he was diagnosed. But he was CEO during the final months of care. Yes. And your father complained about the quality of that care? Sarah's hands clenched under the table. My father complained about what was happening to his hospital, about corners being cut, staff being intimidated, patients being neglected. He died knowing his life's work was being destroyed, and he asked me to fix it. That's not revenge. That's responsibility. The room fell silent. Brennan reached over and shut off the recorder. Off the record? I believe you. Everything I've seen suggests Marcus is guilty as hell and deserves what's coming. He paused. But cases like this get complicated. Rich defendants hire expensive lawyers who know how to create doubt. They'll drag this out, bleed you in court, and try to break you down until you settle for something less than justice. I won't settle. Then you better be ready for war, because that's what this is going to be. Sarah stood. I've been to war, Detective. I know what it looks like. She walked out of the station into bright afternoon sunlight, her phone already buzzing with new messages. One from Margaret. Found more shell companies. This is bigger than we thought. Another from Trevor. Diane is telling everyone you faked your nursing license. People are starting to believe it. And one from a number she didn't recognize. You made a mistake coming after Marcus. Walk away now, or things get worse. Sarah stared at that last message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Threats meant someone was scared. Scared meant vulnerable. She'd learned that in combat zones where the loudest threats often came from people closest to breaking. Her phone rang again. This time it was Margaret. We have a problem. What kind? Elena didn't call in sick. She's gone. Apartment cleared out, phone disconnected, social media deleted. She disappeared sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Did she take anything from the hospital? I'm checking now, but Margaret's voice cut off, replaced by sharp breathing. Oh no. Margaret? She had access to the backup servers, the ones with the original financial records, before Marcus altered them. Tell me she didn't. I'm locked out. The whole system is locked down. I can't access any of the historical data. Sarah was already running toward her car. Call IT. Get them to bypass the lockout. They're trying, but she put in some kind of encryption. They're saying it could take days to crack. We don't have days. Those records prove the alterations. Without them, Marcus can claim the current records are accurate, and we're the ones fabricating evidence. Sarah slammed her car door and started the engine. I'm coming back. Don't let anyone touch those servers until I get there. The drive back to Riverside General took 8 minutes, speed limits forgotten. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, backup plans, alternatives. Elena running meant she was involved deeper than they'd suspected. The timing meant someone had warned her, and the server lockdown meant they'd anticipated Sarah would go after the financial records first. This wasn't panic, this was strategy. When Sarah reached the hospital, she found the IT department in chaos. 3 technicians clustered around a terminal, typing frantically while Margaret paced behind them. Status? One of the techs, a young guy with thick glasses named David, shook his head. Military-grade encryption. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Can you crack it? Eventually, but we're talking weeks, maybe months. We don't have months. David spun in his chair to face her. Then you need to find whoever encrypted it and get the password, because that's the only way in. Sarah pulled out her phone and called the federal investigator. Agent Morrison, this is Sarah Lawson. Elena Voss is in the wind, and she locked down our financial servers before she ran. We need to find her now. Morrison's voice was clipped. We've already issued a warrant. Every law enforcement agency in the state has her photo. She had hours to run. She could be anywhere. We're monitoring airports, bus stations, border crossings. If she's moving, we'll find her. And if she's not? If someone's hiding her? Silence on the line. Then, you think Marcus has people on the outside helping? I think someone warned Elena in time for her to cover her tracks and disappear. That suggests coordination. I'll look into it. In the meantime, secure whatever evidence you still have access to. And Miss Lawson, watch your back. People this desperate don't stop at computer crimes. Sarah hung up and turned to Margaret. What records do we still have? Current files, recent transactions, everything from the last 6 months. But the historical data, the proof of alterations, that's all encrypted. What about hard copies, printouts, backup drives, anything physical? Margaret's expression shifted. Your father kept hard copy archives. He didn't trust digital-only systems. Everything was printed monthly and stored in... She stopped. The basement archives. Nobody's been down there in years. They found the archive room behind a locked door on the basement level, past abandoned equipment and old filing cabinets. The air smelled like dust and old paper. Rows of metal shelves held boxes organized by year and department. Margaret led Sarah to the financial records section. These should have monthly reports going back 30 years. Sarah pulled down a box labeled 2024, Financial, January to June, and opened it. Inside were printed reports, invoices, ledgers, all stamped and signed by Margaret's predecessor and countersigned by Sarah's father. "This is it," Margaret breathed. "These are the originals, before Marcus started altering the digital files." Sarah flipped through the documents, comparing amounts to the numbers she'd memorized from the current system. The discrepancies were obvious. Invoices showing different amounts, vendors that existed in the new system but not the old, entire transaction categories that had been added after the fact. "We need to catalog all of this," Sarah said. "Cross-reference every altered document, build a timeline showing when changes were made." "That's going to take days. Then we work nights." They hauled 6 boxes upstairs to Margaret's office and spread documents across every available surface. For the next 4 hours, they worked in focused silence, building spreadsheets, flagging discrepancies, documenting proof. By 8 p.m., they had a preliminary analysis showing over $3 million in fraudulent transactions. Sarah's phone rang. Agent Morrison. "We found Elena." Relief flooded through her. "Where?" "Airport hotel near Denver. She was booked on a red-eye to Mexico under a fake name. TSA flagged her at security." "Is she talking?" "Not yet. She lawyered up immediately, but we found something interesting in her hotel room. $50,000 in cash, and a burner phone with exactly one number in the call log." "Let me guess. Marcus's lawyer?" "Nope. The hospital's head of security, James Keller." Sarah's blood went cold. James Keller was former law enforcement, a 20-year veteran who joined Riverside 2 years ago, right after Marcus arrived. He had access to everything: security systems, employee records, building access, surveillance footage. If James was involved, he could have been covering tracks for months. "Where's he now?" Sarah asked. "We don't know. He didn't show up for his shift this afternoon. Apartment is empty. We've got units looking for him." Sarah hung up and immediately called Trevor. "Where's James Keller?" "No idea. He called out sick around noon. Why?" "He's involved with Marcus. He helped Elena escape." Silence. Then, "Oh, hell. Sarah, if James is dirty, that means we don't know who else in security we can trust. Get everyone you know is clean and lock down the server room, Margaret's office, and the archive room in the basement. Nobody gets in without my direct authorization." "On it." Sarah turned to Margaret. "We need to move these documents somewhere secure. If James has building access..." The lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in immediately, bathing the office in dim red light. Margaret grabbed Sarah's arm. "That's not automatic. Someone cut the main power." They heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate, moving toward Margaret's office. Sarah pulled Margaret away from the door. "Is there another exit?" "Conference room next door connects to the back hallway." They moved quickly, Sarah gathering as many critical documents as she could carry, while Margaret grabbed her laptop. The footsteps outside grew louder. Sarah eased open the door to the conference room just as she heard Margaret's office door crash open behind them. A man's voice, sharp and commanding. "Check every room." Not James's voice, someone else. Sarah and Margaret ran through the conference room and into the back hallway. Red emergency lights cast everything in blood-colored shadows. Behind them, they heard more doors slamming, people searching. "The stairwell," Margaret whispered. "We can get to the ground floor and..." The stairwell door ahead of them opened. 2 men stepped out, both wearing security uniforms Sarah didn't recognize. Not hospital staff. Private contractors. Sarah grabbed Margaret and pulled her back toward the offices. "Other direction. Now." They ran past darkened rooms, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Sarah's mind raced through building layouts, exit routes, defensive positions. Her military training screamed at her to find defensible ground, secure the evidence, call for help. Her phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. "James just showed up with contractors. They're searching the building. Police are 10 minutes out." 10 minutes was an eternity. Sarah pulled Margaret into an unused patient room and locked the door. She shoved a cabinet against it while Margaret called 911, her voice shaking as she reported the break-in. "Police are coming," Margaret whispered. "We just need to..." Glass shattered in the hallway. Footsteps approaching their door. A voice outside, calm and cold. "Ms. Lawson, we know you're in there. We're not here to hurt you. We just need those documents." Sarah recognized the voice now. James Keller. "Then why cut the power?" she called back. Why bring armed contractors into a hospital? Because you've made this more complicated than it needed to be. Marcus was willing to walk away quietly, settle everything out of court, everyone moves on. But you had to go after everything. Now we're cleaning up the mess. Margaret's face had gone pale. Sarah held up a hand for silence, listening to the sounds outside. At least 3 people, maybe more, all positioned between her and the exits. The police are already on their way, Sarah said. We'll be gone before they arrive. But those documents you're carrying? Those are coming with us. Sarah looked down at the files in her hands, proof of millions stolen, patients endangered, lives destroyed. Everything they needed to put Marcus away. If she gave them up, there might not be enough evidence left to prosecute. Marcus's lawyers would tear apart whatever remained, create doubt, delay justice, until everyone gave up. No, she said. Silence outside, then, that's unfortunate. The door handle rattled, someone testing the lock. Then a harder impact, shoulder against wood. The cabinet Sarah had braced against it shifted slightly. Margaret gripped her arm. Sarah, maybe we should... Another impact. The cabinet scraped across the floor. The door frame started to splinter. Sarah's phone buzzed one more time. Trevor. Got hospital security lockdown activated. They're trapped inside, police 3 minutes out. She looked at Margaret and allowed herself a tight smile. They made a mistake. What? They trapped themselves inside with us. Now they can't leave without going through locked doors. Margaret's eyes widened with understanding. The door burst open, the cabinet toppling aside. James Keller stepped in, 2 contractors behind him. He looked older than Sarah remembered, mid-50s, graying hair, the build of someone who used to be dangerous and still remembered how. Ms. Lawson, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah stood her ground, the documents clutched against her chest. You're former police. You know how this ends. I know how it ends if you cooperate. I also know how it ends if you don't. One of the contractors moved forward, reaching for the files. Sarah shifted her weight, her military training flooding back. Distance, positioning, timing. She'd spent years learning how to fight in close quarters, how to use an opponent's size against them, how to survive when outnumbered. The contractor's hand closed on the documents. Sarah pivoted, drove her elbow into his throat, and spun away as he stumbled back choking. The files scattered across the floor. The second contractor lunged at her, but she was already moving, using a desk as a barrier, buying seconds. James pulled something from his belt. Not a gun, a taser. Enough! He aimed at Sarah's center mass. Time seemed to slow. Sarah calculated angles, distances, outcomes. She couldn't dodge, couldn't close the distance before he fired. Sirens wailed outside. Close now, very close. James's finger tightened on the trigger, and Margaret threw her laptop at his head. James twisted, the taser firing wide, probes embedding in the wall. Margaret rushed forward, still screaming, and hit him again with something, a metal clipboard, before the contractors grabbed her and slammed her against the wall. Sarah dove for the scattered documents, scooping up as many as she could while footsteps thundered in the hallway outside. Police! Everyone on the ground now! James cursed, dropped the taser, and ran for the window. He kicked it open and disappeared through it. Second story drop, but survivable into the landscaping below. The contractors froze, hands up, as armed officers flooded into the room. Sarah found herself surrounded by police, their weapons drawn, everyone shouting commands. She raised her hands slowly, documents still clutched in one fist. I'm Sarah Lawson. I own this hospital. Those 2 men broke in. An officer grabbed her arm, not gently. Everyone on the ground until we sort this out. Sarah knelt, still holding the documents, while chaos erupted around her. Margaret was being questioned. The contractors were being cuffed. More officers were searching the building for James, who'd vanished into the night. Detective Brennan appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with weary resignation. Ms. Lawson, we really need to stop meeting like this. Sarah looked up at him from the floor, disheveled and exhausted, clutching stolen documents while surrounded by broken furniture and scattered evidence. They were trying to destroy the proof. I can see that. Brennan helped her to her feet. You hurt? No. Ms. Chen? Margaret was sitting against the wall, holding her wrist. I think I sprained it. Paramedics arrived to check her while Brennan walked Sarah into the hallway. Officers were everywhere now, securing the building, taking statements, processing the scene. James Keller, Sarah said. Former officer. He's working for Marcus, helping destroy evidence. We'll find him. He just assaulted 2 women in a hospital while working for a man awaiting trial for fraud. How is Marcus still making this happen from a jail cell? Brennan's expression darkened. Because he made bail 3 hours ago. Sarah felt like she'd been punched. What? Judge granted bail pending trial, $5 million. Marcus posted it immediately and walked out. That's insane. He's a flight risk. He's destroying evidence. His lawyers argued he's a respected businessman with deep community ties and no criminal record. Judge bought it. Brennan held up a hand to stop her protest. I know, I argued against it, but the system doesn't always work the way it should. Sarah leaned against the wall, exhaustion and rage warring in her chest. 6 months of work, 6 months of evidence gathering, and Marcus was already out, already coordinating attacks, already destroying proof. What do I do now? You secure whatever evidence you've got left. You cooperate with the federal investigation, and you watch your back, because Marcus just sent a very clear message about how far he's willing to go. Sarah looked down at the documents in her hands, smudged, torn, but intact. Proof. Not everything they needed, but enough, maybe. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She answered warily. Sarah Lawson? Yes. This is Dr. Catherine Webb. I used to work at Riverside General until Marcus fired me 8 months ago. The woman's voice was tight with controlled anger. I just saw the news about his arrest. If you're serious about taking him down, I have something you need to see. Sarah's exhaustion faded slightly. What kind of something? The kind that proves he didn't just steal money. He knew patients were dying because of his cuts, and he covered it up. I have the internal reports he buried. Where are you? Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't find me. A pause. I've been hiding these documents for 8 months, waiting for someone brave enough to use them. Are you that person? Sarah looked at the chaos around her. Broken doors, scattered evidence, police lights flashing through windows. Every instinct told her she was walking deeper into danger. Every memory of her father told her to keep going anyway. Yes. Good. Because you're going to need them. Marcus just filed a lawsuit against you personally. Defamation, harassment, wrongful termination, emotional distress. He's asking for $20 million in damages. The hallway seemed to tilt. $20 million? He's trying to bankrupt you before trial. Force you to settle or give up. Dr. Webb's voice hardened. But I can help you fight back. Meet me tomorrow. Come alone. And Sarah? Don't trust anyone who worked closely with Marcus. He had people everywhere, and some of them are still in that building. The line went dead. Sarah stood in the damaged hospital corridor, surrounded by police and wreckage, holding documents that might not be enough, and facing a lawsuit designed to destroy her financially before the criminal trial even began. Somewhere out there, Marcus was free, coordinating attacks, building his defense, and dismantling everything she'd worked for. And somewhere else, a doctor she'd never met was waiting with information that could change everything or be another trap designed to finish what James Keller had started. Margaret appeared beside her, her wrist wrapped in a bandage, her face pale but determined. What now? Sarah looked at the documents in her hands, then at the hospital around them. Her father's legacy turned into a battlefield. Now we find out who we can actually trust, she said quietly. Because tomorrow I'm walking into a meeting that's either going to save this case or get me killed. Margaret drove Sarah home at 2 a.m. because Sarah's hands were shaking too badly to hold the wheel. Neither of them spoke during the 15-minute drive through empty streets. When Margaret pulled up outside Sarah's apartment, she finally broke the silence. You're really going to meet this doctor alone? I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. Sarah opened the door but didn't get out. Marcus just filed a $20 million lawsuit against me. James Keller tried to steal our evidence. Elena locked down the servers. Every move I make, they're 3 steps ahead. She looked at Margaret. If Dr. Webb has proof that Marcus covered up patient deaths, that changes everything. That's not just fraud anymore. That's manslaughter. Or it's a setup. Probably. And you're going anyway. Sarah climbed out of the car. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse. Inside her apartment, Sarah didn't bother turning on lights. She sat in the darkness with her laptop, pulling up everything she could find about Dr. Catherine Webb. 43 years old, emergency medicine specialist, 15 years at Riverside General before her termination 8 months ago, right around the time Marcus's schemes would have been accelerating. The termination report listed performance issues and failure to maintain professional standards. Classic cover language for someone who'd asked the wrong questions. Sarah found a local news article from 9 months back. ER doctor raises concerns about hospital safety. The piece quoted Dr. Webb anonymously, discussing rising patient mortality rates and inadequate emergency response times. 2 weeks after publication, she'd been fired. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from the same unknown number. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., old fairgrounds outside town. Come alone or I disappear for good. Sarah typed back, how do I know this isn't a trap? The response took 3 minutes. You don't. But I watched your father build that hospital from nothing. I watched Marcus destroy it. And I watched you spend 6 months getting humiliated by people who should have been thanking you. I'm not your enemy, Sarah. I'm the witness you need. Why wait 8 months to come forward? Because Marcus threatened my daughter, said if I spoke up, she'd have an accident. She's 16. I couldn't risk it. What changed? He's out on bail. That means he's scared. Scared people make mistakes. And his lawyer just served me with a subpoena for his defamation case against you, which means he's putting me in play whether I like it or not. So I'm choosing my side. Sarah stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed, I'll be there. She set the phone down and pulled up the documents she'd salvaged from the office. Financial records showing altered invoices, fake vendors, diverted medications. Strong evidence, but not irrefutable. A good lawyer could argue clerical errors, accounting mistakes, systemic failures that weren't necessarily criminal intent, but patient deaths that Marcus knew about and buried. That was different. That was concrete. That was the kind of evidence that ended careers and resulted in prison time measured in decades, not years. Sarah worked until dawn, cross-referencing mortality data with staffing cuts and supply shortages. The pattern was obvious once you looked. Patient deaths had spiked 30% in the 18 months after Marcus took over. Cardiac arrests during surgeries with inadequate monitoring equipment, post-operative infections from contaminated supplies, medication errors from overworked nurses pushed past their limits. Her father had seen it happening, had tried to stop it, had died knowing he'd failed. Sarah closed her laptop as sunlight broke through her window. She had 4 hours before the meeting, 4 hours to decide if she was walking into salvation or an ambush. She chose to assume both. At 8 a.m., Sarah texted Trevor, "Need a favor. Don't ask questions." His response came immediately. "Name it. Track my phone. If I don't check in by noon, send police to the old fairgrounds on Route 40. Sarah, what are you doing? Hopefully the right thing. That's not reassuring." "I know." She drove to the fairgrounds in her father's old truck, a beat-up Ford he'd refused to replace even after becoming successful. It still smelled like coffee and old medical journals. Sarah found herself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her father's voice in her head. When you don't know if you can trust the ground you're standing on, make sure you control as many variables as possible. The fairgrounds had been abandoned for years, all rusted rides and collapsed buildings. Sarah parked near the main gate and scanned the area. No other vehicles visible. No movement, just wind pushing trash across cracked pavement. Her phone buzzed. Behind the carousel, alone. Sarah climbed out and walked slowly toward the center of the grounds. The carousel was a skeleton of metal and faded paint, horses frozen in mid-gallop. Behind it, a woman stood near a picnic table, hands in her jacket pockets. Dr. Catherine Webb looked exactly like her ID photos. Tall, dark hair streaked with gray, the kind of tired that came from months of looking over your shoulder. She watched Sarah approach with obvious wariness. "You came alone?" "You asked me to. People don't always do what they're asked." Catherine pulled her hands from her pockets. Empty. "I'm not armed. I'm not recording. I'm just trying to do the right thing before it's too late." Sarah stopped 10 feet away. "You have proof that Marcus covered up patient deaths?" "Yes." "Show me." Catherine pulled a flash drive from her pocket and set it on the picnic table. "Internal quality assurance reports. I was on the committee that reviewed adverse outcomes, patient deaths, serious complications, near misses. We're required by law to investigate and report patterns. Starting 18 months ago, Marcus began burying our findings. Cases that should have been reported to the state medical board just disappeared from the records. Sarah picked up the drive. How many cases? 12 deaths. Another 30 serious complications that could have been prevented with proper equipment or staffing. Catherine's voice cracked slightly. I documented everything. Video recordings of committee meetings where Marcus explicitly told us to alter findings. Email chains showing him ordering staff to destroy evidence. And autopsy reports that were never submitted to state authorities. Why didn't you go to the police? I tried. I filed a complaint with the state medical board. 2 days later, someone followed my daughter home from school. Left a note on her car. Your mother should be more careful about making accusations. Catherine's hands clenched. I have one child, Sarah. I couldn't risk her, so I kept my mouth shut and saved the evidence, hoping someone else would be brave enough to use it. Sarah felt cold understanding settle in her chest. He threatened your daughter to keep you quiet. He threatened everyone who mattered, former employees, their families, anyone who could damage him. That's how he stayed in power, not just through theft, but through terror. And now he's out on bail, which means he can threaten you again. Catherine nodded. His lawyer's subpoena means I'm being dragged into his defamation case, whether I cooperate or not. So I'm choosing to burn it all down while I still can. She met Sarah's eyes directly. Use this evidence. Give it to the federal investigators. Make sure Marcus never walks free again. Sarah pocketed the flash drive. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just win. Catherine turned to leave, then stopped. Your father was a good man. He hired me when other hospitals wouldn't because I'd reported safety violations at my previous job. He said integrity mattered more than politics. You're like him. I'm trying to be. Then be careful. Marcus isn't just fighting to avoid prison, he's fighting to destroy you personally. He wants you broken, bankrupt, discredited. Don't let him win. Catherine walked away toward a car parked beyond the tree line. Sarah watched her go, then pulled out her phone to check the flash drive contents. Medical records, committee transcripts, email chains, everything Catherine had promised. And then Sarah saw the dates. The committee meetings where Marcus ordered evidence destroyed. They'd happened during the same months her father was dying, which meant her father had known. Had probably been in those meetings. Had seen Marcus burying patients' deaths to protect profit margins. Had died knowing the truth and being powerless to stop it. Sarah's phone rang. Agent Morrison. Ms. Lawson, we have a problem. Elena Voss just made a deal. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of deal? Full immunity in exchange for testimony. She's claiming Marcus forced her to encrypt those servers under duress. Says she has evidence that you and Margaret coerced her into participating in a scheme to frame Marcus. That's insane. She has text messages, Sarah, supposedly from you, threatening her job if she didn't cooperate with the investigation. Messages from Margaret discussing how to fabricate evidence. Those messages don't exist because we never sent them. Elena has screenshots, time-stamped, complete with your phone numbers. Sarah felt reality shift sideways. She faked them. Can you prove that? My phone records will show I never... Sarah stopped. Phone records showed calls and texts were sent, not what they contained. If Elena had access to hospital systems, she could have spoofed messages, created false records, built a paper trail that looked legitimate. When does she testify? Sarah asked. Grand jury hearing in 3 days. If her testimony is convincing, they could indict you alongside Marcus. Sarah closed her eyes. I'm being framed. Yes, and unless you can prove those messages are fake, you're going to be fighting charges instead of pursuing them. Morrison paused. There's something else. The judge in Marcus's criminal case just recused himself. Why? Conflict of interest. His wife sits on Riverside General's board of directors. New judge gets assigned tomorrow, which means all previous rulings, including Marcus's bail conditions, get reviewed. So Marcus could have his bail revoked? Or his charges could get dismissed on procedural grounds if the new judge decides the arrest warrant was improperly obtained. Morrison's voice hardened. Sarah, this case is falling apart. Between Elena's testimony, the encrypted servers, and the judge recusal, Marcus's lawyers are building a perfect storm of reasonable doubt. We need something concrete, something they can't spin or dismiss. Sarah looked down at the flash drive in her hand. I have it. Patient deaths. Marcus covered up. Committee transcripts proving he ordered evidence destroyed. Autopsy reports he buried. Silence on the line, then, "Where did you get this?" A witness came forward, former employee. "Which employee?" Sarah hesitated. If she named Catherine, Morrison would want to interview her immediately, which meant Catherine's daughter would be at risk again. "I need to protect the source." "Sarah, I can't use evidence if I don't know where it came from. Chain of custody matters. If this goes to trial and the defense asks how you obtained these files, the source will testify when it's safe. Right now, just analyze what's on this drive. If it proves what I think it does, you'll have enough to keep Marcus locked up permanently." Morrison sighed. "Bring it to the federal building, today. And Sarah, start documenting everything, every conversation, every threat, every move Marcus makes. Because if Elena's fake messages stick, you're going to need your own defense." Sarah drove back to town with the flash drive clutched in her hand and her mind racing through scenarios. Elena testifying against her, fake text messages, a new judge reviewing the case, Marcus's lawyers systematically dismantling the investigation from every angle. She thought exposing him would be enough. Gather evidence, present facts, let justice work. But Marcus wasn't just fighting the charges. He was rebuilding reality around himself, turning victims into villains and making truth look like conspiracy. Her phone buzzed. Margaret calling. "Sarah, we have a situation at the hospital." "What now?" "The board called an emergency meeting. They're voting on your ownership status." Sarah nearly swerved off the road. "They can't do that. They're claiming you obtained ownership through fraudulent means, that your father was mentally compromised when he transferred the hospital to you, that you manipulated him during his final illness." Margaret's voice shook. "Marcus's lawyers filed a motion this morning challenging the entire inheritance." "On what grounds?" "Undue influence. They're arguing your father intended to leave the hospital to a charitable trust, and you convinced him to change his will while he was dying. They have a witness, someone claiming they overheard you pressuring your father to sign documents." Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. "That's a lie. My father was completely lucid until his final week. His doctors documented his mental capacity. The will was witnessed and notarized." "I know, but they're creating doubt. And the board is panicking. Half of them want to distance themselves from you before the whole thing explodes." Margaret's voice dropped. "Sarah, if they vote to challenge your ownership, you lose legal authority over the hospital, which means you can't access records, can't make decisions, can't fight back." "Exactly." Sarah pulled over to the side of the road, hands shaking. "When's the vote?" 4 o'clock. Today." Sarah checked her watch. 11:30 a.m. She had 4.5 hours to get to the federal building, hand over evidence, and make it back to the hospital for a board meeting that would determine whether she lost everything her father had left her. "I'll be there." "Sarah, even if you show up, you might not have enough votes. Marcus spent 2 years building relationships with these board members. They're terrified of him." "Then I'll have to remind them who actually owns the hospital." Sarah hung up and sat in the truck, breathing slowly, forcing herself to think tactically instead of emotionally. She had evidence of fraud, evidence of covered-up deaths, and a witness willing to testify. But she also had fake text messages, encrypted servers, and a board about to strip her authority. Every move she made, Marcus countered, every piece of evidence she found, he buried or discredited. Every ally she gained, he threatened or turned. She pulled out her phone and called Trevor. "I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "Find out who witnessed my father's will signing. The lawyers who notarized it, the hospital staff who were present, anyone who can testify about his mental state." Sarah's voice steadied. "Marcus is claiming my father wasn't competent when he left me the hospital. I need proof that he was." "I'm on it. And Trevor, be careful. If Marcus finds out you're helping me..." "I don't care what Marcus finds out. Your father gave me a job when nobody else would. I'm not letting his memory get destroyed by that bastard." Sarah drove to the federal building and met Agent Morrison in a secure conference room. She handed over the flash drive and watched him load it onto an air-gapped laptop. His expression shifted as he reviewed the files. "This is extensive. Is it enough?" Morrison pulled up a video file. Committee meeting footage showing Marcus explicitly telling staff to alter mortality reports. His voice was clear. We can't afford another state investigation. Bury the findings. If anyone asks, equipment failure, not systemic issues. That's him ordering a cover-up, Morrison said slowly. On camera, with witnesses present. Can you use it? If your source is willing to authenticate the footage and testify to its accuracy? Yes. This could be the difference between fraud charges and manslaughter charges. He looked at Sarah. Who gave you this? Sarah met his eyes. Someone who lost everything fighting Marcus and isn't willing to lose anything more. Protect them, and they'll testify when it's safe. Morrison studied her for a long moment. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm playing the only game I have left. She left the federal building at 3:15 p.m. and drove straight to Riverside General. The board meeting was being held in the main conference room, the same room where she'd revealed her identity and watched Marcus get arrested. That felt like months ago instead of days. Sarah walked in at 3:58 p.m. Every board member was already seated. Their faces showed various degrees of discomfort, anger, and fear. At the head of the table sat Gerald Winters, board chairman and a local attorney who'd known her father for 30 years. Miss Lawson, thank you for joining us. I own this hospital, Gerald. I don't need an invitation. His expression tightened. That's actually what we're here to discuss. We've received documentation suggesting your ownership may not be legally valid. Documentation from Marcus's lawyers. Documentation from a credible source raising legitimate concerns about your father's mental state during his final illness and your potential influence over his decision-making. Gerald adjusted his glasses. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure proper governance. If there's doubt about ownership legitimacy, there's no doubt. Sarah pulled a folder from her bag and dropped it on the table. Those are the original will documents, signed and witnessed by 3 attorneys, 2 doctors, and a hospital administrator. All of them will testify that my father was fully competent, completely aware of his decisions, and acted without any coercion. We'd like to review... You want to review documents because you're scared. Marcus spent 2 years making you afraid to oppose him, and now that he's facing consequences, you're terrified he'll drag you down with him. Sarah looked around the table. How many of you knew what he was doing? How many board meetings did you sit through where the numbers didn't add up? Where people asked questions that got ignored? Where red flags were dismissed as growing pains? Silence. That's what I thought. Sarah's voice hardened. My father built this hospital to serve this community. Marcus turned it into a criminal enterprise while you watched, and now you want to question whether I'm fit to own it? I'm the only one who had the guts to stop him. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia, who owned a local business, spoke up. We're not questioning your courage, Sarah. We're questioning whether this hospital can survive the legal battle you're creating. Between Marcus's lawsuit, the federal investigation, and now questions about ownership, we're hemorrhaging money and reputation. Then fight back. Support the investigation. Help me prove what Marcus did. And if we lose, if his lawyers win, this hospital goes bankrupt and 500 people lose their jobs. We won't lose? You don't know that. Patricia's voice rose. You're gambling everything on the belief that justice will prevail. But cases like this get settled. Rich criminals make deals, and hospitals like ours get destroyed in the crossfire. Sarah looked at Gerald. Call the vote. He hesitated, then nodded. All in favor of suspending Sarah Lawson's ownership authority pending legal review? 5 hands went up. All opposed? 3 hands, including Margaret's. Gerald's voice was quiet. Motion passes. Ms. Lawson, you are hereby suspended from executive authority over Riverside General Hospital until ownership questions are resolved through proper legal channels. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. 8 months of planning, 6 months undercover, days of evidence gathering and fighting and surviving attacks, all of it stripped away with a simple vote. You're making a mistake. We're protecting the hospital. You're protecting yourselves. Sarah stood. But that's fine. I don't need executive authority to finish this. She walked out before anyone could respond. In the hallway, Trevor was waiting. Did they? Yeah. Sarah, I'm sorry. Don't be. I just need you to do one more thing. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the calendar. That grand jury hearing where Elena testifies against me. It's in 3 days. I need to know who else is testifying, what their statements say, everything. How am I supposed to? Your hospital security. You have access to legal correspondence, personnel files, everything Marcus left behind in his office. Find me something I can use. Trevor nodded slowly. And if I get caught, then we both go down together. Sarah managed a tight smile. But we're not going down. She walked out of Riverside General knowing it might be the last time she entered as its owner. The building her father built, the legacy he'd left her, the responsibility she'd sworn to protect, all of it hanging by a thread while Marcus systematically destroyed everything she'd worked for. Sarah sat in her truck and pulled out her phone. One message waiting from an unknown number. You're tougher than I expected, but toughness won't save you from what's coming. Drop the investigation and I'll drop the lawsuit. Keep fighting and I'll make sure you lose everything. Your hospital, your freedom, your father's reputation. You have 24 hours to decide. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed a response. See you in court. She hit send and started the engine. Behind her in the hospital's administrative wing, someone was watching from a window. They pulled out their phone and made a call. She's not backing down. Then we move to contingency. Are you sure? I said move to contingency, tonight. The line went dead. The watcher stared down at Sarah's truck pulling out of the parking lot, then walked quickly toward the elevator, already dialing another number. In her truck, Sarah never saw the surveillance, never noticed the tail that picked her up 3 blocks from the hospital, never realized that while she'd been fighting battles in conference rooms and federal buildings, Marcus had been positioning pieces for an endgame she hadn't anticipated. Her phone buzzed one more time. Trevor. Found something in Marcus's office. You need to see this. Come to the hospital. Loading dock. Midnight. Sarah's instincts screamed trap, but she texted back, I'll be there. Because she was out of options, out of allies, and out of time. And sometimes the only way forward was through the obvious ambush, hoping you were faster or smarter, or lucky enough to survive what waited on the other side. Sarah spent the hours before midnight checking equipment she hadn't touched in years. The tactical vest was dusty but functional. The pepper spray was still sealed. The knife her father had given her before her first deployment felt heavy and unfamiliar in her hand. She wasn't going to the hospital expecting violence, but she'd stopped expecting things to go smoothly. At 11:45 p.m., she drove back to Riverside General through empty streets. The loading dock sat on the east side of the building, isolated from main entrances, poorly lit. Exactly the kind of place you'd choose for a meeting if you wanted privacy or if you wanted to ensure nobody witnessed what happened. Trevor's truck was already there, parked near the service entrance. Sarah pulled in beside it and killed her engine. She waited, watching for movement, counting shadows. Nothing seemed wrong, but her instincts wouldn't settle. She texted Trevor, I'm here. No response. Sarah climbed out slowly, one hand near the pepper spray in her jacket pocket. The loading dock was silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and distant traffic. Trevor's truck was empty, doors locked. She walked toward the service entrance. The door was propped open with a brick, against protocol, against security procedures. Sarah pulled it wider and stepped into the dimmed hallway beyond. Trevor? Her voice echoed off concrete walls. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, half of them burned out. Sarah moved forward, every combat instinct she'd ever learned screaming warnings. The hallway opened into the loading bay, a large space filled with pallets, medical supplies, and industrial shelving. Trevor stood near the center, his back to her, staring at something on the ground. Trevor, what? He spun around and Sarah saw his face. Split lip, bruised eye, blood on his collar. I'm sorry, he whispered. They have my sister. 3 men stepped out from behind the shelving units. Not hospital security, not police. Private contractors in dark clothes, the same ones who'd attacked her with James Keller. Sarah's hand moved toward her pocket, but the lead contractor already had his weapon drawn. Don't, hands where I can see them. Sarah raised her hands slowly. What do you want? Marcus wants to have a conversation, private. No recordings, no witnesses, no federal agents listening in. The contractor gestured toward a door at the back of the loading bay. He's waiting. And if I refuse? The contractor looked at Trevor. Then we'll have a different conversation with his sister. She's 17, lives in the student housing on campus, walks home from the library every night around 10. It would be a shame if something happened to her. Trevor's face crumbled. Sarah, please, just talk to him. He said he'd let her go if you... It's fine. Sarah kept her voice steady, even as her mind raced through options. 3 armed men. Trevor compromised. Her only weapons would get her shot before she could use them. I'll talk. They walked her through the back door into a storage room that had been cleared except for a single table and 2 chairs. Marcus Hale sat in one of them, looking relaxed despite the circumstances. He'd changed from his courtroom suit into casual clothes, jeans, expensive sweater, the kind of outfit that said he was in control even while facing federal charges. Sarah, thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice. You always have choices. That's what this whole situation is about. The choices you've made and the consequences that follow. Marcus gestured to the empty chair. Sit, please. The contractors positioned themselves near the door. Sarah sat slowly, keeping her hands visible. Where's Trevor's sister? Safe. For now. Whether she stays that way depends on how this conversation goes. Marcus leaned forward. I'm going to be honest with you because I think you're smart enough to appreciate honesty. You've been impressive. Coming in undercover, gathering evidence, building a case, that took guts. Your father would be proud. Don't talk about my father. He was a good man, principled, which is exactly why he would have hated what you're doing. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. You're not fighting for justice, Sarah. You're fighting for revenge, and revenge is expensive. You stole millions. You covered up patient deaths. You threatened families. That's not revenge. That's accountability. Accountability? Marcus laughed. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about reality. The hospital was failing when I arrived. Your father ran it like a charity instead of a business. We were hemorrhaging money, losing staff, falling behind on equipment upgrades. I saved Riverside General. By stealing from it? By making hard decisions your father refused to make. Yes, I restructured finances. Yes, I cut costs. Some of those cuts had consequences, but the alternative was closure. 500 jobs gone. A community without emergency care. That's the choice I faced. Sarah felt her anger rise, but kept her voice level. You falsified records. You diverted medications to the black market. You ordered staff to bury evidence of patient deaths. I made strategic decisions to protect the hospital's viability, and until you showed up playing detective, it was working. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop the investigation, tell the federal agents you made mistakes, misunderstood the situation, whatever story lets everyone save face. In exchange, I drop my lawsuit against you, and we settle the ownership question quietly. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. And if I refuse? Then the grand jury hears Elena's testimony in 2 days. They see the fake text messages. They see evidence that you coerced witnesses and fabricated documents. You get indicted alongside me, except you don't have my resources to fight it. You lose the hospital, your nursing license, probably your freedom. And Trevor's sister has a very unfortunate accident. Marcus turned back to face her. Or you take my offer and everyone survives. Your choice. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Everything about him radiated confidence. The posture, the tone, the casual way he discussed destroying lives. He genuinely believed he'd won, that this late-night threat session would break her because all his other moves had failed. Can I make a phone call? Marcus smiled. Who are you going to call? The police? They're already looking for you. The federal agents? They can't help you now. Your lawyer? This conversation isn't happening, remember? Sarah pulled out her phone slowly. The contractors tensed, but Marcus waved them down. Let her. I want her to understand how alone she really is. Sarah didn't dial. She just opened the voice recording app that had been running since she'd walked into the loading dock and turned the screen toward Marcus. His smile vanished. Every word, Sarah said quietly. Every threat. Every admission, all recorded. Marcus lunged for the phone, but Sarah was faster, pulling it back and holding it out of reach. The contractors moved forward, but she spoke quickly. This recording is already uploading to a secure server. If I don't enter a password in the next 60 seconds, it automatically sends to the FBI, state police, and every news outlet in Colorado. Marcus froze. You're bluffing. Try me. The room hung in suspended silence. Sarah's heart hammered, but her hand stayed steady, phone held high. The contractors looked at Marcus for direction. Trevor stood near the door, confusion and hope warring on his face. Marcus's expression shifted through several emotions, rage, calculation, desperation, before settling into cold acceptance. You think this changes anything? That recording is inadmissible. You obtained it under duress without consent. Colorado is a one-party consent state. I'm a party to this conversation. The recording is perfectly legal. Sarah lowered the phone but didn't pocket it. And even if it wasn't admissible in court, it's absolutely admissible in the court of public opinion. Every news station will play this. Every website will host it. Your voice, threatening a teenage girl, admitting to covering up patient deaths, offering bribes. I didn't admit to anything. You didn't. You said you made strategic decisions that had consequences. You acknowledged cutting costs that resulted in patient harm. You confirmed ordering staff to handle evidence of deaths. Sarah's voice hardened. And you just threatened violence against an innocent girl unless I dropped a criminal investigation. That's witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and kidnapping. Want me to keep going? Marcus's face flushed red. You have no idea what you've done. The people I work with, the connections I have, are going to abandon you the second this recording goes public. Sarah stood. Because that's what powerful people do when someone becomes a liability. They cut ties and pretend they never knew you. She looked at the contractors. Whatever he's paying you isn't enough to go down for kidnapping charges. Trevor's sister goes free now, or I press send and you're all facing federal prosecution. The lead contractor exchanged glances with his partners. Professional calculation, weighing risks and rewards. After 5 seconds, he nodded. Call your guy. Tell him to release the girl. Marcus spun on him. I'm paying you to... Not enough for this kind of heat. We do security work, not kidnapping. The contractor pulled out his phone. She's being released now. Trevor's phone buzzed. He checked it, relief flooding his face. She's okay. She's at home. She's safe. Sarah pocketed her phone. We're leaving now. If anyone follows us, if anything happens to Trevor or his sister, if Marcus even looks at either of them wrong, that recording goes viral immediately. The contractor stepped aside. Sarah and Trevor walked past them, through the loading bay, into the parking lot. Neither of them spoke until they were in their vehicles. Sarah, I'm sorry. They grabbed my sister from campus. They said if I didn't, it's fine. Is she really safe? Trevor checked his phone again. Yeah, she sent a photo. She's home with our mom. Good. Go be with them. Don't come back to the hospital until this is over. What are you going to do? Sarah looked back at the loading dock, where Marcus was probably screaming at his contractors, trying to figure out how his trap had backfired. I'm going to finish this. She drove straight to the federal building and called Agent Morrison from the parking lot. It's 1 a.m., Ms. Lawson. I have a recording of Marcus Hale threatening a minor, admitting to covering up patient deaths, and attempting to obstruct justice. How fast can you get here? Morrison was there in 20 minutes. Sarah played the recording twice while he took notes, his expression growing darker with each replay. This is admissible? One-party consent. I was present for the entire conversation. It's legal. And he threatened a specific individual? Trevor Garcia's sister, 17 years old. Marcus had contractors grab her from campus to force Trevor's cooperation. Sarah pulled up the text messages between her and Trevor. Here's the evidence trail. Trevor warned me it was a trap, but I went anyway because I knew Marcus would incriminate himself. Morrison leaned back in his chair. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as the only leverage I had left. That was incredibly stupid. It worked. Morrison couldn't argue with that. He made several calls, to his supervisor, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to someone at the state police. By 3 a.m., they had a plan. We're moving up the arrest, Morrison said. New charges based on this recording. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The judge will revoke bail immediately. Marcus goes back into custody tonight. What about Elena's testimony? If Marcus is in custody on new charges, Elena's deal becomes irrelevant. She was trading testimony for immunity from fraud charges. But if we're pursuing Marcus for violent crimes instead, her testimony doesn't help us, which means her lawyers will probably pull her from the grand jury rather than risk her perjuring herself. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. So the fake text messages, won't matter. We're not building a case around financial fraud anymore. We're building it around patient deaths, cover-ups, and violent obstruction. Those fake messages don't touch any of that. Morrison stood. Go home. Get some sleep. By morning, Marcus will be in federal custody, and his legal team will be scrambling to contain the damage. Sarah drove home as dawn broke over the mountains. She should have felt relief, but exhaustion was drowning everything else. She'd been running on adrenaline for days, barely sleeping, fighting battles on multiple fronts. Now that one major fight was ending, her body was demanding payment for the borrowed energy. She fell asleep on her couch, still wearing her jacket, and woke 6 hours later to her phone ringing. Margaret. Turn on the news. Sarah fumbled for the remote. Every local channel was running the same story. Hospital CEO arrested on new federal charges. The footage showed Marcus being led from his home in handcuffs, his expensive house surrounded by federal vehicles. His lawyer stood on the front lawn giving a statement about wrongful prosecution and violations of due process, but nobody was listening. The story had the recording, not the full version, but enough excerpts to destroy Marcus's public image. His voice admitting to cost-cutting that harmed patients, his threats against Trevor's sister, his attempt to bribe Sarah into dropping the investigation. Sarah's phone didn't stop ringing for the next hour. Reporters, former employees, board members, everyone suddenly very interested in talking to the woman who'd brought down Marcus Hale. She ignored most of them until Gerald Winters called. Ms. Lawson, the board would like to speak with you. About what? Reversing yesterday's vote. Reinstating your ownership authority. We made a mistake. Sarah let the silence stretch. When? Today. This afternoon. We're calling an emergency meeting. I'll be there. She hung up and immediately called Dr. Catherine Webb. It's done. Marcus is in custody on new charges. You're safe to testify now. Catherine's voice shook. Are you sure? Agent Morrison confirmed it. Marcus can't threaten anyone from federal lockup, and his organization is falling apart. Elena's deal is dead. His lawyers are abandoning him. His political connections are pretending they never knew him. Sarah paused. It's safe to come forward now. It's finally safe. The board meeting that afternoon was shorter than the previous one. Gerald stood at the head of the table looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. In light of recent developments, the board moves to reverse yesterday's suspension and fully reinstate Sarah Lawson's ownership authority over Riverside General Hospital. All in favor? Every hand went up. Motion passes unanimously. Gerald looked at Sarah. We apologize for doubting you. We should have trusted you from the beginning. Sarah didn't smile. You should have trusted my father. He knew something was wrong. He tried to warn you. You ignored him because Marcus was persuasive and you were scared. The board members shifted uncomfortably. What matters now is fixing what's broken, Sarah continued. Marcus corrupted this institution from the inside. We need to audit every department, review every contract, investigate every questionable decision made in the last 2 years. It's going to be expensive, time-consuming, and embarrassing, but it's the only way forward. Patricia spoke up. What do you need from us? Complete transparency. No more protecting reputations or hiding mistakes. If someone on this board knew what Marcus was doing and stayed silent, I want them gone. If anyone profited from his schemes, they answer to federal investigators. No exceptions. Heads nodded around the table. And one more thing, Sarah said. We're establishing a patient advocacy board. Real oversight, real authority to investigate complaints and challenge decisions. Because the only reason Marcus got away with this for so long is that nobody with power was listening to the people he was hurting. The meeting ended with assignments and deadlines. Sarah left feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Fragile, tentative hope that Riverside General could actually be saved. Over the next week, the dominoes fell faster than anyone anticipated. Elena Voss, realizing her immunity deal was worthless and facing perjury charges for the fake text messages, agreed to cooperate fully. She provided encryption keys for the locked servers and testimony detailing how Marcus had coerced her into helping cover his tracks. Turned out he'd been having an affair with her and threatened to tell her husband unless she cooperated. Classic manipulation. James Keller was arrested trying to board a flight to Argentina. He cut a deal immediately, providing evidence about Marcus's broader network, the contractors he'd hired, the threats he'd made, the bribes he'd paid to various officials. Every revelation made Marcus's situation worse. The State Medical Board launched a full investigation into patient deaths at Riverside General. Dr. Catherine Webb's testimony was devastating. 12 preventable deaths documented in detail, with Marcus's explicit orders to bury the findings. The board recommended criminal charges. Marcus's lawyers tried everything: motions to suppress evidence, claims of entrapment, arguments about inadmissible recordings, and prejudicial media coverage. Nothing worked. The case against him was too strong, too well documented, too public to spin away. 3 weeks after Sarah's confrontation in the loading dock, the federal prosecutor's office announced charges: healthcare fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and 12 counts of criminally negligent homicide. Marcus Hale's bail was permanently revoked. He would await trial in federal custody. Sarah stood in her father's old office, her office now, and looked out at the hospital grounds. Staff were arriving for morning shifts, ambulances bringing new patients, the steady rhythm of an institution that served its community. Her phone buzzed. Agent Morrison. "Thought you'd want to know. Marcus's lawyers are discussing a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" 25 years minimum. He serves the full sentence, no parole eligibility, permanent ban from healthcare administration, full restitution to victims and the hospital. Sarah closed her eyes. "Will he take it?" "His lawyers think so. The alternative is trial and potentially life in prison given the homicide charges. 25 years is the best offer he's going to get." "When will we know?" "Next week." "But Sarah?" "Even if he takes the deal, that's a win. He's 62 years old. 25 years means he dies in prison. That's justice." After hanging up, Sarah walked through the hospital corridors. She'd spent 6 months learning these hallways as an invisible nurse. Now people nodded respectfully as she passed. Some stopped to thank her. Others just watched with curiosity or residual fear. The owner who'd brought down a CEO. The woman who'd gambled everything on justice and somehow won. In room 412, Walter was sitting up reading when she knocked. "The nurse who saved the hospital," he said with a smile. "Just a medic who got tired of watching people suffer." "Your father would be proud." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I hope so. I know so. He talked about you during those last weeks, said you were stronger than him, said if anything happened to his hospital, you'd fix it." Walter's eyes were knowing. He was right. Sarah squeezed his hand and continued her rounds. Every patient she visited, every staff member she checked in with, every small conversation reinforced the same truth. This place was worth fighting for. The people it served deserved better than what Marcus had given them. By the time she returned to her office, it was late afternoon. Margaret was waiting with a laptop and worried expression. "We have a problem." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What now?" The auditors found another discrepancy. A big one. Margaret pulled up spreadsheets. Marcus wasn't working alone. Someone else was helping him move money. Someone with high-level access to financial systems. "Who?" Margaret turned the laptop towards Sarah. The screen showed transaction records, all approved by the same digital signature. Gerald Winters, board chairman, the man who'd just apologized for doubting her. "How much?" Sarah asked quietly. "Over $1 million. Payments disguised as legal consulting fees routed through his firm to offshore accounts Marcus controlled. They were partners." Sarah stared at the evidence, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. Gerald had voted to suspend her ownership, had questioned her father's will, had expressed concern about the hospital's reputation, all while protecting Marcus and profiting from his crimes. "Does Gerald know we found this?" "Not yet, but the auditors will present their full report to the board tomorrow. He'll find out then." Sarah looked out the window at the parking lot below. Gerald's car was still in its reserved spot. He was somewhere in the building, probably thinking he'd survived the scandal by turning on Marcus at the right moment. "Schedule the board meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow," Sarah said. "Full attendance mandatory. And Margaret, don't tell anyone what we found. Let Gerald walk in blind." Margaret nodded slowly. "You're setting another trap." "I'm finishing what I started. No more corrupt officials pretending to be victims. No more people escaping accountability because they were smart enough to cover their tracks." Sarah's jaw tightened. If Gerald helped Marcus steal from this hospital, he answers for it. All of it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her father, about the months he'd spent watching his hospital crumble while the people he trusted betrayed him. Gerald had been his friend for 30 years. They'd built Riverside General together, survived financial crises together, celebrated successes together. And Gerald had sold him out for $1 million. The next morning's board meeting started with routine business: financial reports, staffing updates, construction bids for delayed maintenance projects. Gerald ran through the agenda with practiced efficiency, completely unaware of what was coming. Then Margaret stood. "I have an additional item." The auditors completed their investigation into Marcus Hale's financial activities. They found evidence of additional fraud beyond what we previously reported. Gerald's expression didn't change. "How significant?" "Very." Margaret pulled up documents on the conference room screen. "Over $1 million in fraudulent payments made through a law firm controlled by someone on this board." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at Gerald, whose face had gone pale. There must be a mistake." "No mistake." Sarah stood. "Your digital signature approved every transaction. Your firm received the payments. Your offshore accounts received the money." She walked to the head of the table. "You helped Marcus steal from this hospital while serving as board chairman, while pretending to protect my father's legacy." Gerald stood abruptly. "I was acting as legal counsel. Those were legitimate consulting fees." "For what? What legal advice did you provide that was worth $1 million? Sarah's voice was ice. "You helped Marcus hide assets. You restructured his shell companies. You advised him on how to evade detection. That's not legal counsel. That's conspiracy." "You have no proof." Margaret handed him a folder. "Bank statements, email correspondence, meeting notes where you and Marcus discussed hiding money from auditors. The federal investigators already have copies." Gerald's hand shook as he flipped through the documents. His composure cracked completely. "Sarah, please. I made mistakes. I got in over my head. But I never wanted anyone to get hurt. People died. Patients died because Marcus cut costs and you helped him hide the money he was stealing. You don't get to claim you never wanted anyone hurt." Gerald collapsed back into his chair. The other board members sat frozen, shock and betrayal written across their faces. "The FBI is waiting outside," Sarah said quietly. "They're here to take you into custody. You can walk out with them cooperatively, or you can make this harder. Your choice." Gerald looked around the table at people who'd been his colleagues, his friends, for years. Nobody met his eyes. Finally, he stood slowly. "I'm sorry." Sarah didn't respond. She just watched as federal agents entered the conference room and escorted Gerald Winters out in handcuffs. Watched as the man her father had trusted walked away to face consequences for betraying everything they'd built together. The board meeting continued in stunned silence. Patricia eventually spoke. "What happens now? Now we find a new chairman. We finish the audit. We rebuild trust with this community." Sarah looked around the table. "And we make sure nothing like this ever happens again." After the meeting, Sarah stood alone in her father's office, looking at the framed photos on his desk. Him cutting the ribbon at Riverside General's opening. Him with young surgical residents. Him receiving a community service award. In every photo, Gerald Winters stood beside him. Sarah's phone rang. Her lawyer. Marcus accepted the plea deal. 25 years federal prison. Sentencing is scheduled for next month. Sarah closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. "Thank you. There's one more thing. Marcus wants to speak with you before sentencing. His lawyers say he has information about his organization, names of other people involved. He'll only discuss it with you directly." Every instinct Sarah had screamed trap. But she also knew that if Marcus had information about other corrupt officials, other people who'd helped him destroy the hospital, she needed to hear it. "Set it up," she said. "I'll meet with him." "Are you sure?" Sarah looked at her father's photos one more time. "I'm sure. But this time, we do it in federal custody with guards present and everything recorded. No more midnight meetings. No more private conversations." "I'll arrange it." Sarah hung up and sat in her father's chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Marcus arrested, Gerald exposed. The hospital beginning to heal. Justice, however incomplete, finally happening. But one question remained unanswered, hanging in the air like smoke. If Marcus had more names to give, how deep did the corruption actually go? And who else had her father trusted who'd betrayed him? The answer would come in a federal detention facility, in a conversation with a man facing the rest of his life in prison, in a final confrontation where the person who'd been underestimated and dismissed would sit across from the person who'd nearly destroyed everything and ask one simple question: who else? The Federal Detention Center sat 30 miles outside Bellwood, a concrete fortress surrounded by fencing and surveillance cameras. Sarah arrived at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning with her lawyer, Agent Morrison, and a recording device that would capture every word of the conversation to come. The guard who processed them through security was professional but wary. He's been asking for you every day since the plea deal. Refused to talk to anyone else. What's his state of mind? Sarah's lawyer asked. Cooperative, quiet. He knows he's done. They walked through multiple security checkpoints before reaching the conference room where Marcus waited. He sat at a metal table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, looking smaller somehow than Sarah remembered. Prison was aging him rapidly. Graying stubble, hollow eyes, the pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. He looked up when she entered. Something flickered across his face that might have been shame. Thank you for coming. Sarah sat across from him without responding. Her lawyer and Morrison positioned themselves along the wall, witnesses to whatever came next. Marcus cleared his throat. I assume you want names, people who helped me. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. He nodded slowly. Before I give you anything, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not trying to justify what I did, but I need you to hear why it happened. I know why. Greed. No, fear. Marcus's voice was quiet. When I came to Riverside General, the hospital was 6 months from bankruptcy. Your father had poured everything into patient care and nothing into financial sustainability. We couldn't make payroll. Equipment was failing. Staff were leaving. I had two options: let it collapse or save it the only way I knew how. Sarah's jaw tightened. By stealing? By restructuring. Initially, yes, it was legitimate cost-cutting and financial reorganization. But then I realized how easy it was to move money without oversight, how desperate the board was to believe everything was fine, how much personal profit I could generate if I was careful. He looked down at his cuffed hands. The first time I skimmed funds, I told myself it was temporary. A loan I'd repay once the hospital stabilized. But there's no such thing as temporary corruption. Once you cross that line, you keep finding reasons to justify the next step. Nisaki Marti. And patient deaths. How did you justify those? Marcus flinched. I convinced myself they weren't my fault. Equipment failures, staffing shortages, medical errors, those happen everywhere. I didn't see myself as responsible. He met her eyes. I was wrong. Every decision I made to protect my schemes put patients at risk. Every dollar I stole was a dollar that could have saved lives. I see that now. Sarah felt no sympathy. You see it because you got caught. Maybe. Probably. Marcus leaned back. But sitting in a cell for 3 weeks gives you time to think about what you've destroyed. And I destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my freedom, your father's legacy. The only thing I can do now is help you finish cleaning up the mess. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, approved by guards, Sarah assumed, and slid it across the table. Names, positions, dollar amounts. These are the people who knowingly helped me. Gerald, you already caught. But there are others. A state health inspector who accepted bribes to overlook violations. 2 pharmaceutical reps who facilitated the medication diversions. A medical equipment supplier who submitted false invoices and split the profits with me. And 3 hospital employees who helped me alter records in exchange for bonuses. Sarah scanned the list. 15 names total. Some she recognized. Others were strangers. Why are you giving this to me now? Because Gerald is claiming he was duped, that I manipulated him and he had no idea what was really happening. That's a lie. He was a full partner, and if he's allowed to paint himself as a victim, it defeats the entire point of your investigation. Marcus's voice hardened. If I'm going down for this, everyone who profited goes down with me. No exceptions. Morrison stepped forward. Some of these names are outside our jurisdiction. State officials, private contractors. Then expand your jurisdiction. Share the evidence with state prosecutors, the DEA, whoever needs it. Marcus looked at Sarah. You wanted the truth about what happened to your father's hospital. This is all of it. Every person who helped me destroy what he built. Sarah folded the paper carefully. Is there anything else? Marcus hesitated. Your father knew. The room went silent. What? Sarah's voice was barely audible. Not everything. But he suspected financial irregularities. About 4 months before he died, he confronted me. Asked direct questions about vendor contracts and medication inventory. I lied. Told him the audit company had made errors, that I was fixing it. Marcus's expression twisted. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he was so sick by then, so tired. He didn't have the strength to fight. He just said, Marcus, I built this place to help people. Don't make me regret trusting you. Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. And then he died. And then I made sure any evidence of his suspicions disappeared. I altered meeting minutes, deleted emails, removed anything that suggested he'd been on to me. Marcus's voice cracked. I stole his hospital and then I erased his final attempts to save it. That's what I'm most ashamed of. Sarah stood abruptly. Are we done? Morrison nodded. We have what we need. Sarah's lawyer gathered the documents. Marcus watched her prepare to leave, then spoke one last time. For what it's worth, you were right to come after me. Your father deserved better. The patients deserved better. And you, he stopped. You were better at this than I ever expected. I underestimated you completely. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Everyone did. That was the point. She walked out of the detention center into bright sunlight, breathing deeply to steady herself. Morrison followed her to the parking lot. You okay? My father knew Marcus was corrupt and died before he could stop him. I'm the opposite of okay. But now we can finish what your father started. These names, this is enough to dismantle Marcus's entire network. Sarah looked at the paper in her hand. 15 people who'd betrayed everything her father believed in. 15 people who'd profited while patients suffered. How long until you can arrest them? Depends on the evidence quality. Some of these people have powerful connections, but with Marcus's testimony and the financial records, I'd say we can move within weeks. Do it, all of them. Morrison nodded. And Sarah? What Marcus said about your father knowing, that means he was fighting back. He just didn't have time to finish. You finished it for him. Sarah drove back to Riverside General with her lawyer, who spent the entire trip on the phone coordinating with prosecutors. By the time they reached the hospital, arrest warrants were already being drafted for the state health inspector and 2 of the hospital employees Marcus had named. The pharmaceutical reps would take longer. Their crimes crossed state lines and required federal coordination. But the wheels were turning. Justice was slow, but it was moving. Sarah spent the afternoon in meetings, HR briefings about terminating employees under investigation, legal consultations about potential lawsuits from people claiming they were falsely accused, financial projections showing how long it would take to recover the stolen funds. Everything was complicated, expensive, and exhausting. By 6 p.m., Sarah was alone in her office, staring at reports she could barely focus on. Her phone buzzed. Margaret. Turn on Channel 7. Sarah found the remote and switched on the television mounted in the corner. The evening news was running a special report. Corruption scandal expands beyond hospital CEO. Footage showed police arresting the state health inspector at his home. Then a pharmaceutical rep being led from an office building in handcuffs. The reporter's voiceover explained the expanding investigation, the 15 co-conspirators, the millions in stolen funds. And there, in the middle of the report, was a photo of Sarah. The breakthrough in this case came from Sarah Lawson, daughter of the hospital's late founder, who spent 6 months working undercover as a nurse to gather evidence of the fraud. Ms. Lawson declined our request for an interview, but sources close to the investigation describe her as instrumental in bringing down what prosecutors are calling one of the largest healthcare fraud cases in state history. The report continued with interviews from former employees praising Sarah's courage, patients expressing gratitude, community leaders calling for reform. Sarah watched with detachment, still processing everything that had happened. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Lawson, this is Rebecca Torres from the State Medical Board. I'm calling to inform you that we've completed our investigation into Riverside General Hospital. We're recommending full reinstatement of your facility's unrestricted operating license with commendation for your cooperation during the investigation. Sarah closed her eyes. Thank you. We'd also like to invite you to serve on a new oversight committee we're forming to prevent similar situations at other hospitals. Your experience would be invaluable. I'll consider it. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the quiet office watching the sun set over the mountains. 6 months ago, she'd walked into this building as nobody. A temp nurse, probationary staff, someone easy to overlook and easier to dismiss. Now she was the woman who'd dismantled a criminal empire, exposed corruption at multiple levels, and saved an institution her father had built from nothing. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and sad, because her father should have been here to see this, should have witnessed justice finally arriving, should have known that his daughter had finished what he'd started. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Trevor stood in the doorway, looking hesitant. Is this a bad time? No, come in. He sat across from her desk. I wanted to thank you for protecting my sister, for not holding it against me that I led you into Marcus's trap. You didn't have a choice. Neither did you, but you still went. That's the difference between people like you and people like Marcus. You walk into traps knowing they're traps because it's the right thing to do. Sarah managed a small smile. That just means I'm either brave or stupid. Both, probably. Trevor grinned. The staff wants to do something for you. A celebration, recognition ceremony, something. But we know you hate attention, so we're not sure. No ceremonies. But thank you. Trevor nodded, unsurprised. What about a quieter thing? Dinner with the people who worked night shift with you, the ones who saw you get humiliated every day and feel terrible about not speaking up? Sarah considered. That I could do. After Trevor left, Sarah walked through the hospital one more time. She stopped by room 412, where Walter was packing to go home. His son had arrived to pick him up, a middle-aged man who shook Sarah's hand with genuine gratitude. Dad told me what you did, for him and for this hospital. Walter smiled. Told you she was something special. Just a medic, Sarah said. No. Walter's voice was firm. You're the person who proved that doing the right thing still matters. Even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when everyone tells you to give up. Sarah helped Walter to his wheelchair and walked with them to the exit. As they left, she heard Walter's son asking questions about what had happened, and Walter launching into the story with obvious pride. She returned to her office and found Margaret waiting with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I know you're not much of a drinker, but tonight feels like an exception. Sarah accepted the glass. To surviving. To winning. Margaret clinked glasses. Sarah, what you did, what you accomplished, it's extraordinary. Most people would have walked away, sold the hospital, taken the money, let someone else deal with the mess. I couldn't do that. I know. That's what makes you extraordinary. Margaret sipped her wine. What happens now? With the hospital, with you, with everything? Sarah looked around the office. We rebuild. We hire ethical leadership. We create systems to prevent this from happening again. We turn Riverside General back into what my father intended, a place that serves people instead of exploiting them. And you? What do you want? Sarah thought about the question. 6 months ago, she'd wanted revenge, justice, vindication. Now she had all of that, and it felt hollow somehow. Because the people who'd wronged her father were facing consequences, but her father was still gone. The hospital was saved, but the damage Marcus had caused would take years to fully repair. I want to go back to nursing, Sarah said finally. Not administration, not ownership duties, just bedside care. That's what I'm good at. That's what matters. Margaret looked surprised. You're going to keep working as a staff nurse after everything? I spent 8 years in combat medicine and 6 months undercover here. Both times, the work that mattered most was the work nobody noticed. The individual patient interactions, the small acts of care that don't make headlines. Sarah set down her glass. I can hire someone to run the business side. But the patient care? That's what I want to do. That's who I am. Margaret raised her glass again. Then to the owner who refuses to sit in an office. They drank until the bottle was empty and the night sky filled with stars. Around midnight, Margaret left and Sarah locked up the office. She walked through the empty corridors, remembering her first shifts here. The fear, the exhaustion, the constant humiliation. None of it had broken her. All of it had prepared her for the fight that came after. The next morning, Sarah attended Marcus Hale's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former employees, victims' families. Marcus sat at the defense table looking defeated, his expensive lawyers flanking him like pallbearers at a funeral. The judge read through the charges methodically. Healthcare fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, 12 counts of criminally negligent homicide. Mr. Hale, you held a position of trust and authority. You were responsible for an institution that served thousands of people. Instead of honoring that responsibility, you betrayed it for personal gain. Your actions resulted in patient deaths, staff trauma, and community harm that will take years to repair. The judge paused, letting the words settle. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to Riverside General Hospital and the families of victims harmed by your actions. This restitution totals $8.3 million. You are permanently barred from working in healthcare administration or holding any position of fiduciary responsibility. Marcus stood as guards moved to escort him away. He looked back one last time, his eyes finding Sarah in the gallery. She held his gaze without expression, watching as he was led through the side door toward a future measured in decades behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sarah's lawyer gave a brief statement while Sarah stood silent beside him. When the questions became too aggressive, Agent Morrison stepped in and created a path to their vehicle. That's it, Morrison said as they drove away. Marcus is done. Gerald's trial is next month. The other conspirators will face their own proceedings. But the main fight? That's over. You won. Sarah looked out the window at Bellwood passing by. It doesn't feel like winning. What does it feel like? She considered. Like I finally stopped running. Morrison glanced at her. Running from what? From the question of whether I'm strong enough to protect the things that matter. Whether I'm brave enough to stand up when everyone else backs down. Whether I'm my father's daughter or just someone who inherited his problems. Sarah turned to face him. I spent 6 months being invisible because I was afraid of being seen. Afraid of failing publicly. Afraid of proving that everyone who ever underestimated me was right. And now? Now I know that being underestimated is the most powerful weapon you can have, because people who dismiss you don't see you coming, don't prepare for you, don't believe you're capable of taking them down. Sarah smiled faintly. Marcus never thought the quiet nurse on the bench was dangerous. That's why he lost. 3 months later, Riverside General held a memorial service for the 12 patients who died due to Marcus's cost-cutting. Sarah organized it personally, working with families to ensure each victim was honored properly. The ceremony took place in the hospital chapel, standing room only, with speeches from doctors, nurses, and family members. Sarah spoke last, keeping her remarks brief. These patients came to Riverside General seeking care and received betrayal. They trusted an institution that failed them. No amount of justice or reform can undo that harm. But we can ensure it never happens again. We can build systems of accountability. We can listen when patients and staff raise concerns. We can choose integrity over profit, transparency over convenience, and humanity over efficiency. She paused, looking at the photos of the deceased displayed near the altar. These 12 people deserved better. We all deserved better. And moving forward, better is what they'll get. Not because we promise it, but because we've learned what happens when those promises are broken. That's the legacy we carry now, the knowledge that vigilance isn't optional and oversight isn't negotiable. We remember them by doing better. After the service, families approached Sarah to thank her. Some with anger still evident, others with grief, all with a measure of gratitude that someone had finally held the responsible parties accountable. One woman, whose mother had died during a surgery with inadequate equipment, gripped Sarah's hands tightly. They said her death was unavoidable. Medical complication. Nothing anyone could have done. For 2 years I believed that. Then your investigation revealed the truth, that the monitoring equipment was broken and Marcus refused to replace it because it was too expensive. Tears streamed down her face. You gave me answers when everyone else gave me lies. Thank you. Sarah squeezed back. I'm so sorry about your mother. I know, that's why this matters. You didn't do this for glory or recognition. You did it because it was right. Sarah left the service feeling the weight of those words, doing the right thing. Such a simple concept, so difficult in practice, because the right thing required sacrifice, time, energy, safety, comfort. It required standing alone when crowds disappeared. It required believing that truth mattered even when lies were more convenient. Her father had understood that, had built his entire life around that principle. And now Sarah understood it too, not as an abstract ideal, but as lived experience, as the exhausting, terrifying, essential work of refusing to look away when something was wrong. The hospital continued healing slowly. New leadership was hired, administrators with clean records and reputations for ethical management. Policies were rewritten to include patient advocacy representatives in decision-making processes. Financial transparency became mandatory, with quarterly public reports showing exactly where money was going. Staff who'd been wrongfully terminated returned. Diane Fletcher, the supervisor who'd humiliated Sarah, applied for reinstatement and was denied. Her termination stood as acknowledgement that cruelty, even when not illegal, had consequences. The night shift nurses who'd watched Sarah get abused without intervening issued a public apology. Sarah accepted it without comment, understanding that fear made people complicit in ways they later regretted. She wasn't interested in punishment for bystanders, only accountability for perpetrators. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, Sarah received a letter from him. Prison had given him access to paper and stamps, apparently, and he'd used them to write 3 pages of small, cramped handwriting. She almost threw it away unread. But curiosity won. The letter was part confession, part justification, part apology. Marcus wrote about his childhood, growing up poor, watching his parents struggle, about his drive to succeed, to prove himself, to accumulate wealth as protection against ever being vulnerable again, about how that drive had twisted into something unrecognizable, something that prioritized money over humanity. He wrote about the specific patients he remembered who'd died, their names, their families, the circumstances of their deaths. He claimed their faces haunted him now, that prison had stripped away the rationalizations he'd used to justify his actions. The final paragraph read, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that you did the right thing. Not just legally, but morally. You're the person I should have been, someone who protected people instead of exploiting them. Your father would be proud. I hope someday you can forgive yourself for the time it took to stop me. The fault was never yours." Sarah folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer. She didn't forgive Marcus, didn't absolve him of responsibility, but she understood something from reading his words, that corruption wasn't always born from malice. Sometimes it grew from fear, from insecurity, from the gradual erosion of principles under pressure. That understanding didn't excuse anything, but it clarified the work ahead, building systems strong enough to withstand that erosion, creating accountability structures that caught problems before they became catastrophes, fostering cultures where speaking up was rewarded instead of punished. A year after Marcus's arrest, Sarah finally moved into a permanent office. Not her father's old space, which felt too much like occupying a shrine, but a smaller room near the emergency department. She furnished it simply: a desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf with medical texts and photographs. The photo she looked at most often showed her father on Riverside General's opening day, standing in front of the building with a smile that radiated pride and hope. Sarah had been 7 years old, barely visible beside him, looking up at the hospital like it was the most impressive thing in the world. She kept that photo where she could see it while working, a reminder of why any of this mattered. Trevor knocked on her open door one afternoon, grinning. "You have a visitor." Dr. Catherine Webb stepped into the office, looking healthier than when Sarah had met her at the abandoned fairgrounds. More rested, less frightened. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all. Please sit." Catherine settled into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "I wanted to update you. The state medical board cleared me. All charges related to my termination were dropped. I'm officially employable again." "That's wonderful. It's because of you. Your investigation proved Marcus fired me for reporting safety violations, which means my termination was retaliation. I'm eligible for back pay and can apply for positions without that black mark on my record." Catherine leaned forward. "So I'm here to apply. For a position at Riverside General, if you'll have me." Sarah felt something warm spread through her chest. "The emergency department would be lucky to have you." "You sure? I'm a whistleblower with a history of making administrators uncomfortable." "That's exactly what we need," Sarah smiled. "Someone who won't stay quiet when something's wrong. Someone who'll fight for patients even when it costs them personally. That's the kind of doctor my father hired. That's the kind I'm hiring now. Catherine's eyes glistened. Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For protecting my daughter. For finishing what I couldn't. You started it. I just had more resources and less to lose. That's not true. You risked everything. Your safety, your reputation, your inheritance. You could have sold the hospital and walked away rich. Instead, you walked into danger over and over because it was right. Catherine's voice strengthened. That's not having less to lose. That's having the courage to risk what matters most. After Catherine left, Sarah sat alone thinking about courage. Real courage, not the Hollywood version, the kind that looked like showing up for another shift after being humiliated, like gathering evidence when threats multiplied, like choosing justice over safety, truth over comfort, accountability over peace. Her father had shown that courage building this hospital. Sarah had shown it saving it, and now others would show it maintaining it, protecting it, ensuring the lessons learned weren't forgotten. That evening, Sarah attended the staff dinner Trevor had organized months ago. 23 night shift nurses, respiratory therapists, and support staff gathered at a local restaurant, swapping stories and toasting Sarah's health. She sat in the middle of the noise and chaos, listening to people describe their memories of the last year. One nurse recalled watching Diane humiliate Sarah in front of patients. I wanted to say something so badly, but I was terrified. Diane had gotten 2 people fired the week before. I'm ashamed I stayed silent. Another described the rumors that had circulated about Sarah. We thought you were running from something. Failed marriage, medical error, something that got you blacklisted. Nobody imagined you were actually investigating the CEO. Trevor raised his glass. To Sarah Lawson, who proved that the quietest people are sometimes the most dangerous. Everyone drank. Sarah felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. These were people who'd witnessed her worst moments, who'd seen her powerless and humiliated, who now understood what she'd been doing and why. Thank you, she managed, for this, for continuing to work here after everything that happened, for trusting that Riverside General can be what it should be. As the evening wound down, people approached her individually with questions, thanks, requests. One young nurse asked how Sarah had maintained composure during months of disrespect. Sarah considered the question carefully. I remembered why I became a medic, not for recognition or respect, but because someone needed to help people who were suffering. That purpose doesn't change just because people treat you badly. The work matters regardless of whether anyone notices. The nurse nodded thoughtfully. I think I needed to hear that. Driving home that night, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The anger that had sustained her for a year was finally fading, replaced by something quieter but more durable. Purpose. The knowledge that she'd done what needed doing and could now move forward building instead of fighting. Her apartment still felt temporary even after a year, but she'd started adding personal touches. Photos from her military service, her father's stethoscope in a shadow box, books she actually wanted to read instead of investigative files. She sat on her couch with a cup of tea and thought about the future, about the Oversight Committee invitation from the State Medical Board, about the request she'd received to speak at healthcare conferences about fraud prevention, about the patients she'd continue caring for as a bedside nurse. None of it felt like victory. It felt like responsibility, the ongoing, unglamorous work of protecting something that mattered. Her phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. Board approved your proposal. Patient advocacy program starts next month. You're building something remarkable here. Sarah typed back. We're building it. All of us. Because that was the truth she'd learned in the last year. Change never came from one person. It came from one person taking the first step, then others joining, then a movement building until the corrupt systems couldn't withstand the pressure. Marcus Hale had been stopped not because Sarah alone had exposed him, but because Trevor had helped. Margaret had persisted, Dr. Webb had testified, Agent Morrison had investigated, and dozens of others had contributed pieces to the puzzle. The power hadn't been in Sarah's individual strength. It had been in her refusal to quit, which had inspired others to stop accepting the unacceptable. 2 years after Marcus's arrest, Sarah stood in Riverside General's remodeled emergency department during its grand reopening. New equipment gleamed under bright lights. Adequate staffing moved efficiently through updated spaces. Patients received care without fear of substandard treatment or negligent oversight. The mayor gave a speech praising the hospital's recovery. The board chairman, a new one, elected after Gerald's conviction, thanked the community for its support. Several employees spoke about the culture change, the renewed focus on patient care, the accountability that now existed at every level. Then they asked Sarah to speak. She approached the microphone reluctantly, still uncomfortable with public attention. The crowd was substantial: staff, patients, community members, reporters documenting the turnaround. 2 years ago, this hospital was failing, not because of lack of resources or medical expertise, but because leadership prioritized profit over people. That failure cost lives. It destroyed careers. It betrayed the trust this community placed in an institution meant to serve them. Sarah paused, choosing her next words carefully. What happened here wasn't unique. Healthcare fraud happens everywhere. Administrative corruption exists in countless hospitals. And it persists because people stay silent, out of fear, out of pragmatism, out of belief that one person can't make a difference. She looked around the crowd, making eye contact with staff she'd worked alongside, patients she'd cared for, families who'd lost loved ones. I'm here to tell you that silence doesn't protect anyone. It enables harm. Real protection comes from accountability, transparency, and the willingness to speak up even when it's dangerous, even when you're alone, even when everyone tells you to stay quiet. Her voice strengthened. My father built this hospital believing that healthcare was a right, not a commodity, that patients deserve dignity, not exploitation, that communities should be served, not profited from. Those beliefs cost him nothing when times were easy, but when times got hard, when corruption took root, those beliefs would have cost him everything to defend. Sarah felt emotion rise, but pushed through it. He died before he could finish that fight, so I finished it for him. Not because I'm special or extraordinary, but because someone had to, and I was in a position to try. That's all any of us can do. Identify the problems we're positioned to address, and refuse to look away. She stepped back from the microphone. The applause was immediate and sustained. Sarah endured it for 30 seconds before retreating to the back of the crowd, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. Dr. Webb found her near the exit. That was powerful. That was honest. Same thing, Catherine smiled. Your father would be proud, not just of what you accomplished, but of who you are. Sarah felt tears threaten but blinked them back. I hope so. I know so. I worked with him for 15 years. He valued integrity above everything else. You embodied that. After the ceremony, Sarah returned to her office and found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Miss Lawson, you don't know me, but I'm the attorney who processed your father's will. I wanted you to know that during one of our final meetings, your father told me something that seems relevant now. He said, if anything happens to this hospital after I'm gone, Sarah will fix it. She's stronger than she thinks, braver than she believes. And when she finally stops hiding from her own strength, she'll be unstoppable. I thought you should know that he saw you clearly. He knew exactly who you were and what you were capable of. And he trusted you to finish what he started. With respect, Jonathan Marks. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her father's words settling into her chest like stones marking a foundation. He'd known, had understood her better than she'd understood herself, had trusted her with his legacy not because she was fearless, but because she was strong enough to be scared and act anyway. She folded the letter carefully and added it to the drawer where she kept important documents, court records, investigative files, evidence of everything they'd survived. Then she changed into scrubs, clipped her badge to her chest, and headed to the 4th floor for her shift. Room 412 had a new patient, an elderly woman recovering from hip surgery. Sarah introduced herself, checked vitals, adjusted medications, and sat beside the bed answering questions with patience. You're the nurse who saved the hospital, the woman said suddenly. Sarah smiled. I'm just a nurse. That's what my daughter said you'd say. But she told me what you did, how you fought back when everyone else was scared, how you risked everything to protect people like me. Someone had to. Most people don't. Most people see something wrong and convince themselves it's not their problem. The woman reached for Sarah's hand. Thank you for being someone who refused to convince herself. Sarah squeezed gently. You're welcome. Now let's make sure you're comfortable and ready to heal. She continued her rounds through the night, caring for patients who mostly didn't know her story, who just saw a competent nurse doing her job well. That anonymity felt comfortable, familiar, Right. Because this was who she'd always been. Not the woman who brought down a CEO, but the medic who showed up for people who needed help. The rest was just context, circumstances that had forced her hidden strength into visibility. At 3 a.m., during a quiet moment at the nurse's station, Sarah looked down the hallway she'd walked as a probationary employee. The same fluorescent lights, the same scuffed floors, the same room numbers. Everything looked identical. Everything was completely different. The hospital had healed. The corruption had been excised. The people responsible faced consequences. And Sarah had transformed from invisible to undeniable, proving that power didn't come from titles or authority, but from refusing to accept injustice quietly. Trevor appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You look contemplative. Just thinking about how much has changed. Everything's changed. We went from a nightmare to a place people actually want to work again." Sarah accepted the coffee. "Not everything changed. I'm still just a night shift nurse." "No." Trevor's voice was firm. "You're a night shift nurse who owns the hospital, exposed massive fraud, brought down corrupt officials, and inspired an entire community. That's not just anything." Sarah considered arguing, then stopped. Because he was right. She wasn't just anything anymore. She was someone who'd faced impossible odds and won. Someone who'd been underestimated, dismissed, and threatened, and had turned all of it into fuel for justice. "I guess I've learned something," she said quietly. "What's that?" "That being overlooked isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes being invisible gives you the freedom to see clearly, move freely, and strike precisely. They never knew I was dangerous because they never bothered to look." Trevor raised his coffee cup. "To staying dangerous." Sarah clinked her cup against his. "To protecting what matters." They finished their shift as dawn broke over the mountains. Sarah drove home through empty streets, exhausted and satisfied, already thinking about the evening shift to come. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from Agent Morrison. Final conviction came through. All 15 co-conspirators sentenced. It's over. Sarah pulled into her parking spot and sat in the truck, her father's truck, feeling the weight of those words. It was over. The investigation, the trials, the fighting, all of it finished, except it wasn't really over, because the work of protecting Riverside General would continue. The vigilance required to prevent future corruption would never end. The responsibility Sarah had accepted when she went undercover would last as long as she ran the hospital. But that was fine. That was right. Because some responsibilities weren't burdens to escape. They were purposes to embrace. Sarah climbed out of the truck and looked up at the sky, where stars were fading as sunlight spread. She thought about her father, about the hospital he'd built, about the legacy she'd fought to preserve. And she thought about the quiet nurse on the bench, the invisible woman nobody noticed, who'd waited for exactly the right moment to prove that underestimated didn't mean defeated, that powerless didn't mean helpless, that silent didn't mean complicit. She'd been all those things once, overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. She'd used every bit of it as camouflage while she prepared to strike. And when the moment came, when everything was finally in position, she'd revealed herself and watched her enemies collapse under the weight of their own corruption. That was the lesson, Sarah realized. The thing her father had known and she'd learned the hard way. Power didn't announce itself. Real power waited, watched, prepared, and struck only when victory was certain. Sarah walked to her apartment with her head high, her scrubs worn but clean, her military bracelet visible on her wrist. 8 hash marks. 8 deployments worth of strength. But the war that mattered most, the fight for her father's legacy, was finally won. And the soldier who'd fought it could finally rest.